summer
break.
No more working for a week or two. Fun and laughter on a summer
break.
No more worries for me or you for a week or two.
It's summer break. Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Doof Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most recreational work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
But before we get into the summer break, Elliot, let's take a quick break from that to talk a bit more about our upcoming 25-hour charity live stream, All Packed Up 2, All Paled Up Beyond the Pale.
Yeah, now that the fan art contest is all wrapped up, we're back to spruiking this each week at the start.
Yes.
And we wanted to talk about the segment that I am possibly the most excited for. It's definitely in my top couple.
Yeah, 100%. I fucking love trivia, Elliot, but the problem with trivia is anytime you have trivia, people who make their own trivia always make it the most boring. So what we decided to do is steal question formats from a bunch of other like trivia-based game shows, effectively, that we love, and make Otherverse themed questions out of them.
Yes. So we've got like an only connect section for those of you who love feeling stupid.
I fucking love Only Connect, one of my favorite game shows. And I feel stupid all the time when I watch it, but yeah.
And we've got some actually questions. I'm very much looking forward to that segment. Hopefully, at some point in the future, we'll be putting out like a Family Feud style questionnaire. I want to try and sneak around a Family Feud in there as well.
Yeah.
So we'll survey 100 people on the subreddit. So keep your eye out for that. And and then we're going to have some special guests for this one. We probably shouldn't say who they are yet, but I'm actually just thinking I probably better message them and make sure they're familiar with these formats because I don't want you wiping the floor with them because
yeah, we bring them into a game show that they don't know the rules of, the rules that we constantly change, and then beat them. Oh, that would be rough. But yeah, it's going to be a very fun one for sure.
Yeah. And they'll all be pale themed and the audience can play along. It should be fun.
Ellie's been teasing me by telling me about all the wonderful questions he's been writing, so I'm really eager to dive into it.
Yes, special thanks to those of you who have been, I've got a few people who I've been beta testing the questions with, sort of, because it's very tricky trying to gauge the difficulty level with such a specific topic range as Pale. So it's been really valuable to those of you who have been helping me with the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's going to be a fun one, so make sure you stay tuned for more details about All Packed Up 2, All Paled Up Beyond the Pale, coming soon.
And I guess with that, let's get into the chapters.
Let's get back into summer break. 13.2, we're in Lucy's head, and it's Lucy's turn to Alcazar. This time we'll be focusing on, as Lucy puts it, actions and associates, particularly those pertaining to Kenneth. And basically the theme of this chapter is, what is it actually like day to day being the Carmine?
Well, the real theme is, it's not very good day to day.
Well, yeah, it asks and then immediately answers that question.
I do really like how this chapter just sort of immediately dives into the action. I think most chapters in Pale definitely take time to reorient us into the head of the Kenneteer whose chapter we're in before necessarily getting straight into it. This one is just very much like, listen, you know what this chapter's going to be. This is Lucy's Alcazar trip. We just immediately start with her diving right in, and this is possibly the most hyped I've been in the year and a half this story's been running. So I was very glad that it was just Wildbow cut the fat. It was just no, we're going in.
Yeah, these are some hype chapters in general, I think. I mean, the Alcazaring, and anytime there's a dinner party, obviously we're going to be hyped for that too. But yeah,
it's a very visual, I loved, there's just a few paragraphs taken to just describe, what Lucy sees, how she sort of ends up blending into the Carmine. It's just, again, it's one of those scenes that was we need this visual adaptation stat.
Yeah, 100%. It's a fun premise for a chapter as well. We've seen the judges a bit, and we've seen them judging the showdown with Edith and the showdown with Marcy, but we haven't ever really seen outside of that what the day-to-day of judging is like. So it's a great way to get insight into that, see what it's like, and then obviously because it's Lucy, the most judicious of our three Kenneteers, the most obsessed with justice. It's just like such an especially fun setup. It just is so perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's sort of right from the get go, you're sort of like, oh, it's going to be really fun to see how Lucy goes with handling this responsibility because that's something. Well, I mean, that's her. That's a huge chunk of her character arc. That's why it's happening. Like we talked about this last week, how perfectly this is blending together with their character arcs.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
especially
and
it's a great
continues to.
reveal. It's a great reveal when we find out the way the Furs are forcing her to cope with it, like they did to Verona, is they're making her make the decisions too, which is very fun.
Yeah.
Um, but one thing I wanted to point out right away, which I thought was super interesting, was like Lucy has absolutely no issue just sort of blending into the Carmine in the way that Verona did. Like Verona really struggled to stay anchored between being her, being fully the Carmine, or being this sort of hybrid, like the Carmine cat that she was at times. Like she really struggled to get in the role, and maybe part of it is that she coached Lucy a bit after her experience, but part of me just thinks like Lucy is essentially stepping in here into a person who's angry at the world for treating them unfairly and just kind of being shit, and now has the weight of the world on her shoulders, and it's just made her kind of more lonely and stuck and hopeless. And I was like, oh, Lucy just probably doesn't really need to do anything to get into that character. That's in many ways that's her to a T.
Yeah. she's very ready to be here and make decisions.
Yeah, and like all the stuff just with like the throne not being able to sit comfortably, or when it's comfortably it's cheap and it's wrong.
Yeah.
Obviously that comes back importantly later, but yeah, just that moment where we find out Lucy is also going to have to make her own versions of the choices. I was like, oh, I love what the Furs are doing here.
Yeah.
And it makes you think as well, what a fucking opportunity this is for the Kenneteers. Like Zed talked about a little bit last week, only people on super important missions might get to meet a judge towards the climax of their journey. And Avery's like, oh, we met them like day one. And so it's already just meeting these guys is a big deal. This ability the Kenneteers have gotten, also this opportunity to go into the mind of a judge, see how their world works. Like I reckon they probably know more about the judges now than I reckon like 90% of practitioners would or will ever know.
Yeah.
Like they were already kind of advantaged in their understanding of others based on how they were introduced to the practice. They've always been, some of the most pro other practitioners we've met. But it's worth calling out how kind of crazy it is that they're getting such a detailed glimpse at these super powerful others that I bet most people don't know any of this.
Yeah, it's interesting to keep that in mind, I suppose. The thought that the other Kenneteers really just must not have any... I mean, sorry, not the other Kenneteers. Other practitioners mustn't have any of the same depth of knowledge about the judges. I wonder if there's a world in which that plays into a showdown between the Kenneteers, the judges, and like Mussa, for example.
Yeah. I wonder... I can't think of it right now, but I wonder if there is a way that having this information will help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing to call out about this is some of my favorite Wildbow chapters are these like short story type chapters. Like one of my favorite chapters so far has been the dossiers on Bristow's Aware. And that's basically what this is as well. And I love those types of chapters. They're just so fun.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like some of the interludes, especially like I'm remembering back to some of the ones that were similar impact. Like they are some of the best ones.
Yeah.
I loved as soon as you see the number 1 come up above the like first case here, and with all the talk like last week of how you can have like 12 landmarks. It doesn't have to be minutes; it could be 12 landmarks of any kind, or 11.
Yeah.
But so as soon as you see the 1 above the first case, I was like, oh fuck yes, we're gonna get 11 of these. I can't wait.
Yeah, definitely. Let's dive into the first one, shall we? The
Okay.
case of Edward Lehman and Henrietta Belton, who are two friends who end up getting married to help Henrietta escape one bad circumstance, but break oaths and fall into another bad circumstance as a result. These oaths collide, and Lucy must arbitrate between two two or more pretty terrible options, I suppose.
Yeah. And like this story has a really fun sort of like Shakespeare-y fairy tale
Yes.
vibe. I mean, I think the fairy tale one's called out explicitly.
Mm.
Um, but what I kind of love about that is like, yeah, including things like evil stepmothers and stepsisters and the fairy tale stuff, or even the Shakespeare things, it kind of puts you in that headspace of these stories where you're kind of getting ready for a happy ending or like a tragic one, I guess. Like, because like a clean ending, I suppose. Because even if you think about the
Yeah,
Shakespearean
yeah.
tragedies,
You're
I admit
expecting
I've
all the threads to tie together in a way that leaves you with a satisfying resolution.
yeah, like I haven't read that much Shakespeare, but the ones that I have read, even like yeah, all the tragedies like Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet, like even though everyone dies, it all kind of wraps up in a relatively neat, clean way.
Mm.
So even if you're not expecting a happy ending, you're expecting an ending where it's sort of like, oh well, at least all the threads were closed, and it's like, well, that's not what we get
No,
at all.
Lucy has to choose which of the threads will get closed and which ones just will hang.
Yeah, but there's not even the good thing that there's not even an answer which closes all the threads even with like a disaster. There's always somebody's going to come out of this in a better position even after they did something wrong.
Mm.
Um yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like a good moral for this story is sometimes there's no way to judge something and make it fit into a black and white dichotomy, which I think Lucy has often um, tried to fit the world into a black and white. And obviously, part of her growth, especially in the past, like arc or arc and a half, has been realizing that that's not always possible or not always healthy. So I think it's very interesting that this is what she sees.
Yeah. And it's not just that because it's also like there is sort of an answer that she wants but it costs in different ways. Like that's the other side of this is like you can look at this individual situation and say, "Oh, well this is what should happen." But that's where the other judges come in and start explaining to her, "Yeah, but that's going to mean that, these other people will come in and this will fuck that up." And it's like that's
Yeah.
that's the other side of what Lucy's been dealing with is like these things don't exist in isolation, and other parts of the system will come in and punish you for trying to do something right that
Yeah,
goes against it somewhere else.
if Lucy tries to make some of the best possible decisions for this circumstance, it will mean that it will have ramifications that might just mean that, she gets bound and deposed, right?
Yeah,
Like, is this the hill you want to take a stand on for this one thing?
yeah, exactly. And I think like that's the super interesting thing that we sort of learn about the judge's role here. Like obviously the Carmine has this added whole thing because she's like loyally miserable, and we'll get there. But like you could even say someone who seemingly is kind of happy and content in the role, like the Alabaster
Mm,
Doe, like that's just someone who I guess has made that decision. I think the Alabaster talks about, oh, you can sort of game the system in various ways, and so like that's somebody who's decided to go the route of, well, I can't overhaul the system, and I'll die trying, but if I try to game it in these little ways and get little victories, that's enough for me. And
mm.
there's an argument for thinking like that. Like it's certainly better than Musser or Bristow or whatever. But like I guess also all the people at the top thinking like that is a huge part of how you get stuck.
Yeah, yeah. Having said that, there is a solution that Lucy tiptoes around, which I really liked, which was basically the sable carcass says Lucy's saying, "Oh, well, she was a child; her words shouldn't count." And the sable says, "Well, if she was old enough to awaken, she's old enough to practice. We have to kind of those things go hand in hand." And to me, the solution to that is not
So
make her words
kids,
binding, but yeah, don't let kids awaken to practice. I mean, it sounds like a good solution to me, to be honest. It would solve a lot of the really harsh and bullshit things with practitioner society.
I mean, honestly, I still feel like practitioner parents would find a way to make their kids miserable because
Oh, of
I
course they would. I mean,
like, you know,
Sol would be miserable even if his mum
oh
wasn't a
yeah,
practitioner.
and they'd be like training them not to lie and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it wouldn't fix the problem, but like it definitely it felt like a no. Like, yeah, just the idea that like a, you know, 10-year-old can
Mm.
be like, I will never lie again, and then start making like, yeah, oaths that are binding for their rest of their life. Like, that's obviously stupid as hell. Like, yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting. We'll touch on this more next chapter, really, but um, there's this aspect to Henrietta slash Arietta's story, of the way she turns herself into an other a bit, and is like, you know, because she can't be with the boy because of bad stuff that happened in her past family. That, like, as I was reading it, I was like, God, I hope Lucy does not try to connect this to Verona.
Mm.
um, Obviously, we'll get to where Verona and Lucy are there, but like it almost felt like part of this story happening here. Like, some of the aspects of Henrietta's stuff almost felt like little bits of like bait for her to connect it to Verona in a very, well, in a way that would have been even more unhealthy for their current, like,
Mm.
you know, situation.
Interesting. Mm. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of I'm glad that we're not seeing the Verona and Lucy argument play out. I mean, we'll get to that in a bit, but if there was small pieces of ammo that they could throw at each other, I would hate to see it.
um, so I wanted to talk about this part where basically one of the judges says to Lucy, like, yeah, if you wanted to sort of, you know, make it so her oath wasn't binding because she was a kid or whatever, you'd have to undo all the workings she's wrought. That'd take power you would deprive yourself of for other future decisions and actions. And I think this quote's sort of really important because it's basically where the story is introducing the concept that the judges, we sort of view them as all powerful, and they are in some way, but they do still have a budget, basically. Um,
Mm.
like this felt like the equivalent of, you know, saying, "Oh, should we decriminalize marijuana possession?" It's like, do you realize how many appeals and like how expensive it would be, um, to sort of do that and change those laws? And it's like, well, yeah, but that's money well spent, isn't it? Like, getting people out of jail who shouldn't be there. Like,
Yeah.
just looking at this, it's like undoing, yeah, undoing the stuff that like was, you know, bound by the oaths of 10-year-olds. Like, yeah, I don't know. I was like, I can see it.
Mm.
And then like similarly, like the next sort of step of this is then when the other judges start talking about like the decision to make kids unable to have oaths or whatever would decrease the power of one's word a little bit, and perhaps that's fair. Perhaps drunken words shouldn't matter. Sorry, it wasn't just children; it was like drunks and stuff as well. But like
Mm.
they're like, it still weakens the practice, and then they start talking about how, like, you know, the practice is what powers others, so weakening the practice is a bad thing. And I just, I don't know, that like it's just it's a really shitty argument to make. I think, like this idea that weakening the practice, by removing people's like the power of people's words, it's sort of like it's like it feels like an analogy to money to me, or
Mm.
just like trust in the system. Like, you know, the idea
Mm.
that if you weaken part of the system, or, you know, the economy, you know, well, that's going to hurt the poor people because they won't be able to buy food or whatever. Um, and it's just like, yeah, but like we could also just do something else. Like, there's got to be another way to, like, magic existed before the seal, before words were binding, didn't it? So like, how do like that can't just be, that just can't be true. Like, there must be a way to still have this power exist without
Mm.
truth telling. And it's just like, you know, but I think it's very hard to see that when this is all that's been around for thousands of years or whatever.
Mm. Yeah, I mean the systems like this are self-perpetuating just through momentum, right? Like even if there's no actual things keeping it in place, and obviously for the other of us there are, just the momentum of not challenging the system leads to the system not being challenged.
Yeah, and I think that's true in real life. I mean, we'll actually talk
Mm.
about that a bit, I think, when we get to Connor, next
Mm.
chapter.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I mean that's sort of exactly the point. Is now, like, truth and the Seal of Solomon has been the way that power has been sort of established and consolidated for so long that it's hard to picture that it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm.
Um, but like we've heard like the Oni set up alternate rules of discourse, or we know that there was magic before the seal, so it's just like it just reeks of like that same sort of argument for not changing the economy or something, where it's like no, it just we need to do even more changes than you're thinking.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I guess like the other thing that sort of comes out of both of these aspects, like both the fact that the the Carmine would have to worry about other people coming and just invading, or the fact that uh, that there's so many limits on what they can really do. It it really helps you focus in on how even at the top, even with all the power, these judges are still in so many ways like trapped and limited.
Mm. Yeah. It's pretty depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, and we even saw a glimpse of it with Abe Musser and his movie, right? Like,
Yeah, I suppose. I don't want you to try and make me feel empathy for Musa, though. Let's
no,
back
no,
away from
like,
that.
no, exactly. Like, people trapped at the top of the system are trapped in a very different and less sympathetic
Yes,
way to those at the
yes.
bottom.
He could
But
leave the system anytime he wanted, very clearly.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I feel
Mm,
like Reed kind of sits as an example of how that's not quite true. Like I wouldn't be surprised to learn that, even if Abe hasn't had to live up to the same standards he was making Reed live up to, I'm sure that if he fucks up in some non-significant way, there's a whole bunch of people ready to push all his dominoes over and take his place in the family. Like
mm,
I watched a really great video on this like a year or two ago. I actually went looking for it at the start, but I couldn't find it. But yeah, it was talking about like how kings in medieval systems and a lot of dictators as well are almost trapped in their own way because, they will sort of rely on the 10 people underneath them to enforce their power, but because they're reliant on them, they also have to make sure that the majority of those 10 people are happy with them. Otherwise, that's how you get like a coup.
mm,
Um, and yeah, so like not asking you to sympathize with him, but I guess it's worth sort of noting that just like this is the reason we're not just going to be able to, I guess, win Abe Musser over, because I think his his situation, his power is entirely built on his system. So asking him to sort of change any of it, I mean, the rigidity of the Musser system is what stood out to us in that interlude. So it's like he is kind of trapped in it because if he starts to give at all, I think his whole house of cards falls down. Um,
mm,
so yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and again, he's trapped differently to the Carmine too. Like I think the Carmine's trapped in a different way because they have to consider the politics of the other regions and everything. But it's like, yeah, I guess the thing that's starting to stand out to me as well is like we're also noting that even those at the top are trapped in their own way.
mm. Yeah, yeah.
One last thing before we do move on from this section, I'm a little confused by how this decision the Carmine actually makes goes. So
Mm,
this is sort of the last thing we see. Lucy sort of makes her call and then is like, "Oh, what did she actually do?" And so Henrietta gets forsworn,
yes.
but then that means that Arietta comes out and gets to live.
Yeah.
And that was confusing to me because I thought the point of Henrietta getting forsworn was that it meant Arietta's word counted as Henrietta's. So then I don't understand why Arietta gets to be her own entity still.
No, I thought Henrietta and Arietta were always going to be separate entities. But you're right. No, that doesn't make sense because then,
Like, because the point of them being
yeah.
separate came up when Lucy floated the idea that their words were separate and they were like different people.
Mm,
And so I was confused by how Henrietta can get forsworn for something Arietta said. Yeah, I don't know. I like maybe I'm just missing something. I just wanted to put that out there to see if people like know what I'm missing.
mm, hmm. Well, put your answers in the discussion thread. um, but yeah, so the second of these vignettes is a smaller one, the creation of a leatherman, with Lucy slash Carmine deciding what rules to set for this other, which is coming into being. And I think
Yeah.
Lucy sets a very judicious set of rules, which is if you act selfishly, you get selfishness in return, which is like very much the kind of brutality which I think I could live with being the Otherverse being just that. But yeah, it's pretty. The problem with it and the flaw with it is it's very direct. I guess it's not malleable to all the situations which could come up.
The problem with it for me is it's such a contextless test.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that stood out to me was like, they were sort of judging boys who would pick the shiny sword or whatever, and that would make them a murderer. And it was like, what if they were just from a poor family and they saw a shiny sword and they're like, holy shit, I can sell that for like, a huge amount of dough and, try to lift myself out of poverty. And then what, he's going to become a murderer because wait, that seems like a pretty good, that feels like a good reason to me to pick the sword. I just, like the whole concept of the leatherman tests. I was like, this is dumb. Like they said one option was for the Carmine to just not let it come up. And I was like, that's the one they should have done. Like, I don't understand what purpose these tests serve.
Yeah. Maybe you're right. I don't know.
I guess it depends. I guess it depends what the what the context of the conversation with the leatherman is. Like if the leatherman sort of sits them down, sort of says, "Oh, you can't sell this dagger. You have to stab people with it, or you can take these herbs." But then there was like the whole thing about, "Oh, did they learn which herbs are poisonous or not?" And it's like, well, what if they just didn't learn that? Like, anyway, sorry. I read it. I was like, this whole system seems dumb as hell.
It is kind of dumb, isn't it? So the third arbitration is over a contest for the aurum seat, and Lucy ends up siding with the newcomer. This one I found a little bit hard to track. I kind of spent a lot of time trying to interpret the rules of the contest, and then realized like there's a very heavy element of luck to it, which is obviously intentional because this is the judge of fortune.
Yeah, or it's luck you can manipulate through skill and experience. So, like, because I think I understand how the game works, and essentially, like the key component that's meant to sort of remove most of the luck is your ability to read your opponent.
Yes, it's a bluffing game.
Yeah, although that said, I don't really know. I guess that was the part that I didn't understand for the game is like it kind of felt like why, like when she looked at what his dice was, how would her reaction have indicated what it could possibly be? Maybe this is why I'm not an aurum. Because like in poker, it makes sense because you're reading whether people have good hands or bad hands. Like that's a relatively simple Boolean thing you can sort of try to deduce. Whereas it could be like any of 9 symbols, and I'm like, like if she opens it up and sees a skull, how's that reaction going to different to like if she opens it up and sees like a fire? Like if it was me, it wouldn't be any different. I'd be equally just like, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been very good at bluffing games either, to be honest. But I definitely think you could read into it somewhat. Although, God, yeah, the fact there's so many options and it's not just like I don't know, are they bluffing or aren't they? It's what's there? What's the element?
Yeah, like it just doesn't feel like something I'd ever be able to notice in someone because I'm thinking if I looked at it, I wouldn't have a reaction. Like I have a terrible poker face, but that's because I'm able to judge whether I have a good or bad hand. Whereas like the fact that I pick up this, I suppose the poker face comes in when you're picking up what thing you're going to use. Like when you pick up the reed for like water or whatever, and like see what they think as you pick it up. Yeah, I don't know. I at first I was like, "Oh, can we try and play this in all packed up too?" But then I was like, "This game seems difficult and hard."
Too difficult when you don't have magic.
We'd have to come up with like the idiot's version.
Yeah.
Also, I don't think we have 7-sided dice that can like transfer sides in cups. That technology doesn't exist yet, as far as I'm aware. But like, I mean, this game is just crazy, right? Because like you mentioned that one of the domains of the aurum is fortune. So it kind of makes sense that luck is a thing. But then this lady ends up winning because she takes like 50-50 odds, like just basically gambles it. And I'm just like, I don't know what's worse, giving the seat to the sort of person who would bet their life and the seat on 50-50 odds,
Mm.
or letting the seat stay in the hands of somebody who would give another person the opportunity to potentially take the seat at 50-50 odds. Like, I was like, you're
Yeah,
both fired.
yeah.
That's stupid.
It is quite wild, which is kind of why I like it.
Like, yeah, I don't know. It just what it sort of came down to, like, she won because she gambled. I was just like, why are either of you okay with it? Like, this shouldn't have been an option. Um,
Mm.
and I'm like, I found myself wondering, like, because obviously they talk about how the aurum seat has the highest turnover, and presumably that's because, like, the concept of civilization changes like the most rapidly out of all four things. Like, if you think about what civilization represented 400 years ago, especially in North America,
Mm.
versus now, like, it makes sense that's the seat that has changed the most in concept. So of course it has the highest turnover. Like, I wonder how the centipede boy that we have now, what they would think of this game. I feel like civilization is less or more risk adverse.
Mm.
So I almost feel like he'd be less cool with it, but I don't know. Maybe I'm kidding myself.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're right that as a society we are getting more risk averse. So maybe that is an implication that you know the coil, that's what we call them, right? The coil
Yes.
would be less like this. I don't know. Um, the next vignette we get is a very interesting one. Lucy is forced to side with a Nazi sympathizer. And I was kind of being a bit, facetious when I summed it up like that. But I really do think that's the point of this one, right?
I think this is the part of the chapter where I really realized that what the Furs were trying to do here were just grind Lucy down and make her miserable and hate everything,
Yeah.
because it was working on me too. Like,
Mm.
this segment ended, and it was just like she had to side with him, so she kept a close eye to see if she could ever get him for something else. He didn't, so she never got to do anything about it. And I was like, oh, fuck this. Like, it was demoralizing. And like, I imagine whatever level of demoralizing it was for me, it was like 1,000 times more for Lucy and the Carmine.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I was just like, oh, like, the Furs are doing their job.
Yeah. I mean, it's working. Um, but yeah, I thought this was a very fun one. Like, Lucy obviously wants to condemn them both, but has to go by the rules, and like the rules of the evidence, etc. And because the Nazi sympathizer has followed the rules more, she has to side with them. And it's like a perfect example. Like, if the judge is forced to side with the Nazi Germany, and that's the side that's following the rules, clearly implies the system's fucked. Like,
Yeah.
it's like so on the nose. It's perfect.
Yeah, like, you read about those like cases in real courts where, like, the judge will hand down a sentence and basically say, I wish I didn't have to do this, but because of, like, the precedents that are set by higher courts, I have to, and you get, like,
Mm.
whatever punishment, but I don't think you deserve it, but I have to do it, basically. And
Mm.
like that was the vibe times a million here. It was just like, yeah, if if this is what the rules okay, then maybe we need to rethink those.
It's almost a joke that Lucy has to, Lucy just has to follow orders and therefore side with the Nazis.
Yeah.
Like, it's ridiculous. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, and I mean, like, as well as, like, grinding us down, I think this chapter is sort of showing a number of aspects of the judge's role. Like, and this one is obviously just, yeah, what we sort of already touched on. They are so limited, and their hands are so tied in a lot of ways. It's not actually this all powerful position. They are the arms of the system. They're not the drivers.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Rough. Being a Carmine would be rough. Um, so yes, next I think we're at 5 right now. The Carmine speaks with the doe before going off to find a mate. This potential mate rejects her, and she is lonely, too powerful to have any real friends or allegiances. And this is the one that's like secretly 2, right?
Um, no, I thought that was the one where she chats to John.
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
I could be wrong. I got the impression it was when the Sable blacked everything out and then switched her to John, chatting to John.
Right.
I think
Okay.
that
Yeah.
was what Verona thought counted. But yeah, no, you're right. Like, talking about like all the various aspects of the role that this chapter one like starts to hit on. This one is very clear. Like, it's hitting us with the first of the like loneliness beats.
Mm.
That said, I do want to shout out the Alabaster, who I now realize has managed to stay in the role for so long by being a fucking badass. Because I love that moment where the Carmine's like, "Well, what if I just came and ate you then?" And the Doe's just like, "Yeah, I mean, you couldn't kill me, so like if you need to,
Yeah, do
it's
your
cool."
best.
Like, it's just, oh, what a shutdown! It was beautiful.
Yeah. If that's what you need, champ, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the loneliness beat is pretty strong here. Like, the power of the role is so much so that you just can't have any connections with anyone unless you force them, and then why bother?
Yeah.
Which kind of it makes me think the Carmine is I mean, the Carmine's clearly not a piece of shit. If you're a piece of shit, you could force the connections and not care. The Carmine doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Like, that is a really good point. It also just like this is the follow through to that moment right at the start where the Carmine notes that the throne isn't comfortable, and so then when they just use power to make it comfortable, then it's like, oh, this feels cheap.
Mm.
And there's the point where I started to realize, oh god, like the Carmine, from a personality perspective, is just the worst person to have this kind of godlike power because she's somebody who believes in like earning everything, and that's just not how it works when you're like a god like this.
Mm.
Like, I'm sure there are a lot of people. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I'm lazy as hell. Like, I'd be a lot more comfortable with just like making everything easier for myself. I probably wouldn't be a very good Carmine. So like like yeah, it's just sort of one of those things where it's sort of like part of what makes her in some ways a good fit for the role is also what makes it terrible and makes her a bad fit.
Mm.
It almost harkens back to all that stuff we used to talk about with like, oh, Ray should be the head of the BHI because he doesn't want it.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, it like that was almost what happened with the Carmine here.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So next vignette, the Carmine realizes that the spirits are already starting to pander to her. She doesn't even really need to judge anymore.
Yeah, and this is like the two major threads coming together now. It's like the loneliness is now like gets added onto it like purposelessness. Like they don't even really need her. She's just a
Yeah.
figurehead. She barely needs to do anything,
Yeah.
which only adds to sort of adds on top of the loneliness. And then there's like this knowledge that she's contributing to this stability of the system. Because the thing you got to remember is like she's sort of saying, "Oh, the spirits are taking all the decisions I make and just sort of making that the default while I'm in charge."
Mm.
I don't get the impression that Carmine or Lucy liked most of the decisions they were making. So it's like that would feel even shittier because it's not just that you've got nothing to do, but you need to sit here and watch everything autopilot on stuff you didn't even really want to do in the first place. Like, oh, that'd suck.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. You just have no reason to be around. It's very depressing.
Yeah, and I guess like something that sort of starts to come up with the Carmine is also with the idea that you didn't really manage to do anything or make an impact either. Like that was something that
Yeah.
was more expressly brought up in Verona's journey, but
Mm.
like the Carmine wanted to matter, and I think the reason the purple like the loneliness and the purposelessness hits her so hard here is because she also doesn't feel like she actually made anything better. She didn't do anything. She like you know did some minor shit at the end of the day with the system, but like when she's gone, her like nobody's given a shit about her. Everyone's caring about her body because of its power. Nobody gives a shit about her.
Mm.
Nobody cares about her legacy as the Carmine. Like that, I think that's what hurts her the most.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would hurt.
Yeah. And it made me start to think here as well. I don't think this is a question we've actually sort of explicitly asked ourselves for a long time. But like, why the Carmine specifically? Like, and I mean, obviously, in story, like, we know why Charles wanted to kill her, but I'm sort of thinking more meta-narratively, why would Walbo have wanted a story built around the Carmine dying?
Mm.
And, like, thinking about, as we already talked about, the aurum being the seat that changes the most, and thinking about how that maps to the fact that civilization changes the most out of these concepts.
Mm.
I think it's not an accident when these roles change. Like, if you think about it, we had the Carmine carcass in these flashbacks, and then obviously they've been replaced at some point by the Carmine sable.
Yeah.
And so,
Sorry,
sable
no.
prince.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. The Carmine sable. Now that's a conspiracy theory.
Sorry, y'all. I'm very tired today. There's going to be a lot of that. But yeah, so obviously we've got now the sable prince, and I was thinking, like, if you think about to like what death and the end was, 300 years ago versus now, I'd argue that it's a much more a carcass is obviously more grisly, more nature based and stuff. Whereas now I think our lives in general are a lot more sterile or clean. We don't usually have to worry about like the carcass of a dead person that gets handled by a mortician. So like, the idea that we have the sable prince now who more closely represents someone like a mortician versus the carcass of the dead person, like feels like a natural transition for what's happened with like people. So yeah, I get like thinking about the aurum and the sable in that way. I was sort of like, what statement could the story actually be trying to make about the fact that the Carmine throne might be transitioning for the first time in a few hundred years? Like, how is the concept of violence changing in this area in a way that it hasn't for hundreds of years? Because the Carmine was already on the way out. Like, the Hungry Choir murdered it, but like the other judges were already getting ready to replace her.
That's interesting. So Carmine as a representation of like primal violence, especially, defending yourself against beasts, obviously
Yeah,
that
like
falling out of favor as civilization grows. So then what's the new type of violence? And then does that potentially imply John, and maybe that's why John is the candidate, because the new type of violence is kind of sending young men off to die for you.
Yeah, I basically had exactly the same thought. I was sort of like the Carmine represents, like a very nature-based concept of violence. And especially when you remember the judges are lording over like the more remote areas, like the cities are handled by lords.
Yeah.
You are sort of like, oh, okay, that's maybe why this part of it is a bit behind. But yeah, it would sort of make sense that violence is much more turned into like soldiers and the concept of war a little bit more than like nature. Like, as towns have gotten safer and safer, like, the danger of nature has been or warring with nature has been less of a thing.
Is there another contender that would make sense thematically as one of the Kennett others to step into that role? I'm trying to think, like, Marissa Charles. I don't really see it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if we can use this to get any insights, but I can't think of any.
It feels like one of those thoughts that I'm bringing to the table that's like half cooked. Like, I don't really know where this is going. But
I do like the thought. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it feels like there's something here with like the overall themes of the story. I just haven't, connected those dots, and maybe we won't until after the story's over. But yeah, I mean, because the other one that we haven't talked about is obviously the Alabaster has been sitting in her role the longest. And we hear that Alabasters usually die the most. So I was like, oh, what is Walbo saying about this area if the doe has just been alabastering here for, hundreds of years? I didn't really come up with anything. I probably don't. The Alabaster is maybe the one I don't have the clearest idea on what their domain is, which is silly because they were the one who was addressed like directly in Mile End that we did cover.
Yeah,
there was a whole doc on them, but I kind of skimmed it at the time, and I regret that now.
Yeah, interesting. A lot of good points, a lot of good thoughts being raised. So yes, 7th, Lucy decides to reach for John, and she talks to this version of John about just how much of a dead end the Carmine position is.
Yeah, and this is where, this is that point where like Lucy and Wildbow just like bring the subtext out and just tell us like what's happening for her character journey as well, and like how all of this stuff relates.
Mm.
Like, yeah, and like tying her relationship with John in as like something to allow her to express what she's just experienced, being the Carmine. It's so good. Um, like it just ties everything this chapter's been doing with all the stuff she's dealing with so perfectly. Like, as soon as she sort of realizes he's planning to sacrifice himself and he sort of won't tell her why, she's immediately thinking to all the other fucking men in her life that keep doing that. Yeah, and I really like where she ends up talking to him about this thing where like what we've talked about, dealing with this idea that there is no correct answer. Like, she brings up Paul specifically, and I really like this idea that she was like, when I, lost my head and was angry at him and like, did the thing with the knife, that didn't feel good.
Mm.
But then I made up with him and sort of made peace with him, and that didn't feel good either. And it's sort of like, like what a great way of just sort of her saying, like, I don't think there is a right answer with Paul. I don't know what I'm doing, and the Carmine is not helping. In fact, if anything, this is making it worse. And it's just like, yeah, because like that is what defeated the Carmine. Like we'll get to her end obviously later on, but it's just like she couldn't beat the system, she couldn't fight it. She just yeah, got like absorbed, used, and thrown out. And Lucy's looking at this, going, "I don't want that to be me."
Yeah. Yeah, this is an interesting exchange, isn't it? I think it's fun. Lucy has now learned that John is keeping secrets, but obviously because neither she nor the Carmine know what that secret is, she can't learn it here. So there's going to be a fun confrontation coming up soon, or interrogation, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, the Sable did his fucking classic move of like,
Yeah, smokescreen.
yeah, same shit he pulled with Edith, but this one feels better than that one did.
Yeah. This one feels like it's at least for a nicer purpose, which is to give John some privacy.
But it does, like, I mean, the John construct we talked to here does very much seem under the impression that John will just refuse to tell her. So that should be fun. I am enjoying that we're still being teased with this, like, because this has been a thing we've known since at least 10.a, that John had a deal with the other judges, but we still don't know what it is. And like, there's this moment where she's saying, "Why would anyone take this role?" And John touches his chest while saying "purpose." And I was like, "Fuck!" Like, this is a clue. Wobbo's spelling it out for me, and I'm just not putting it together. Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand what purpose John thinks he's going to get out of this role, because it's not the vibe we got in this chapter.
It seemed to imply pretty strongly, like, he wanted somebody to do the role for, right? Like, it gave me like caretaker / protector vibes. So I don't know how that plays into it, but especially because obviously John didn't know Lucy at this point, so I don't know who that could be other than Yolda, who seems kind of out of reach, right?
Well, I wonder if it's like, yeah, like, because he's talked about, it was in 10.a, he talked a lot about how, by protecting someone like Lucy, all he was really doing was like dragging her into his cycle of violence. So maybe that's the point. Maybe he wants that day of distance, but the ability to protect them from a distance. I mean, like, the other thought that keeps jumping into my head is like, he's still got all his mates as like the dog tags, like the little collection of them, right? Like,
true. Touching his chest could be a necklace of dog tags.
Yeah, and I think I've seen other people mention this as a theory on Discord, so I don't want to, like, this isn't like my idea or anything, but like, yeah, just the idea that he wants his ability as the Carmine to basically be to just like let them go and be human or something. Like, maybe it's as simple as that. He's going to stick himself in the Carmine role to free all of his brothers and let them be like innocents or something.
Yeah.
Or keep them as lieutenants. Don't let yourself be lonely like the Carmine was.
Yeah, true. That clearly didn't work out so well for her. So yeah, the 8th scene, Lucy focuses on the Hungry Choir again and sees its creation, and she decides to fuck with it, as did the Carmine.
It's pretty hilarious to find out that if Charles had gotten exactly what he wanted, if this had just been his red herring environment, all it does is help Alexander. Like,
Alex is untouched by it.
he gets all the power, and Ray, Mussa, and
Bristow.
Bristow
Yeah.
are taken out by it, which basically I think in that situation means Alexander's probably going to inherit a lot of their shit as well.
Yeah.
So it's like if Charles had managed to pull this off, arguably it would have been a worse outcome. Arguably, because a lot of less innocent people die this way. But yeah, I guess I don't know. And I don't know how much of that is like Charles's karma. Like I wonder if it's because he has the bad karma. The universe is like, well, fuck you. The one person you really wanted to target gets out.
Yeah, it's pretty funny to me that Lucy's like, oh no, the collateral damage is too big if we do that. Which is crazy because the collateral damage is way worse from the Hungry Choir because of it's a bunch of innocents. What are you talking about, Lucy?
Yeah, exactly. Like again, it's just another one of these sort of no-win situations. Like I was sitting here thinking, is there an option to just make it fail?
Yeah,
Can you just
maybe
have like the Carmine sort of flicks their wrist and some of the words change. I'm like, could you just get rid of like all the words, break a circle, just make it fail,
It
and
was
then confiscate all the power from him because this is dumb as fuck.
okay, Elliot. Let's say you're the Carmine and you've got a few seconds to make a decision. You look at the word cheat. How do you change it to neutralize the Hungry Choir? There
Act.
is a correct answer. Oh yeah, what does that turn it into?
Like a bus service.
I was gonna say you take away the E and make it chat, and then it's just like a chatty kind of chit chat kind of vibe. You just like talk to the ritual, and then if you chit chat with it, it's fine.
Well, but it's still got that abyss energy in it, right? So it's going to be like
Yeah.
really bad to talk to.
Yeah, it's
But
gonna
I
be a
think
real downer.
from what we've seen, the abyss seems to make things like angry and mean. So it would probably just like follow you around all the time, like insulting you.
Oh, terrible.
To basically be like a big, powerful version of Cherry Pop.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, I guess if you have a better answer on how you would change the word cheat, put it in the discussion thread. I'm curious to see if anyone else can come up with any better ones. Heat? What would heat be? I'm trying to think.
I mean, a bushfire.
Yeah, probably pretty bad. So anyway, we get to the next vignette. We see the conspirators conspiring. The Carmine knows that they plan to move against her, and it seems that Charles is going to take the furs.
Yeah, we sort of finally get a lot of hard info here to sort of shore up all the ambiguity since Charles's confession. I mean, it was really annoying reading this chapter the day before we released our episode with Snowdrop's Tiny Fan because I was like, oh god, half the stuff we talked about. Because it was a fascinating conversation when we had it, and I was just like, oh, she's not going to get the credit she deserves now. But yeah, it definitely, yeah. So Charles is meant to get the furs, basically.
Yes, I mean, it seems pretty confirmed by the end of this chapter that that's at least their intentional plan. Initial plan is what I meant to say.
Yeah,
obviously it's an intentional plan.
Yeah, we don't do unintentional plans in this story. Yeah, like the interesting thing that jumped out to me as soon as I started thinking about this is like, I was like, do we really think Marissa can get Charles away from Ray?
Yeah,
like I didn't think so, but then I was like, I reckon this is the same bullshit because remember they weren't worried that the Kenneteers had the furs because it seemed that they just needed the furs to still be like accessible. And I guess I posited the theory in that episode with Snowdrop's Tiny Fan that like all they actually need is the furs and stuff to be around because they're basically going to try and convince everyone to almost let it happen by a vote. And I guess this sort of makes sense. Like Marissa doesn't need Charles to be there; she just needs him to be able to come back if everyone else wants it. Which is like, yeah, I almost feel like part of the climax involving Marissa is going to be her. Like, remember how they said she's banned unless she just sort of comes up and talks to them and like makes her case. I'm now thinking like that might literally sort of be what happens is she's going to come in and part of the climax of this story is basically her just going to be like calling a meeting, gathering everyone in Canada around and basically being like, here's the reason Charles should take the furs. And it's almost just going to be an ethical debate for that part of the climax.
Like I could
see
it.
Yeah, the plan isn't to kidnap Charles. The plan is to make the Kenneteers like obligated
Charles.
to bring him back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could see it happening.
Yeah, but there's definitely a bunch of reasons to think Marissa is also leading Edith and Charles on. Like one of the things she says here to Edith is, "Oh, Edith, you will have Kenneth and you will have Matthew."
Mm.
And I was like,
I mean,
I
that's got to
guess,
be bullshit, right? At
well,
this point.
I think it was technically true back then because she did. Like there was that whole portion of the summer where that was true, right? She was the soft lord of Kenneth, and she was like, with Matthew and fucking leading him on and all that shit. So like that was a true statement. But like one of the things she said in 10.z, I think it was to Edith, was you will never have like Matthew again, or
Mm.
it's super unlikely that you will.
Mm.
So like yeah, but like the way Marissa back in this past like things is sort of like promising them like, oh yeah, it's going to happen, and leaving the implication that it's going to be permanent actually unspoken, and we've sort of seen that fall apart for Edith already, and now I'm kind of looking to Charles thinking, oh, Charles, she might be giving you the sort of prime spot at the end of the show, but I think the first thing Miss told us about Fairy in Arc 2 was don't become a main character in their plots.
Yeah, I mean, we discuss at the start of the next chapter that Charles, if he does take the first, would not be long for the role, right? Like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, like it just
It's not a permanent position. It's not even a somewhat long-term position. It's a very short-term position.
yeah, we'll talk more about that when it comes up. Yeah, but like I've definitely there's a lot of reason to think that Marissa is absolutely leading them both on. We know she led Edith on to a large extent, and sort of changed things once the shit actually hit the fan. And now I'm looking at stuff with Charles, and I'm like, how much is Charles being fooled into thinking this is going to work out in his favor, or how much is he just wanting to go out in a moment of glorious purpose? Like,
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
like it could be that he knows this is going to kill him, but he wants to go out doing something to fuck the system over.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so here's another line that I thought was interesting. Marissa says of her plan that it gives all of us what we want and Kenneth what it needs. So, I mean, obviously that can't be a lie. So, therefore, what does Marissa think that Kenneth needs? Like,
Yeah.
does she think she has good intentions here, or is this just for trying to convince Charles and Edith, and she's got some trick way out of this answer? Because this feels very strange to me.
Yeah, like this sort of ties into that whole debate we've been having for a couple of arcs now, which is like at the end of the day, some of the core motivations of all the characters in Kenneth are the same. Everyone just disagrees on exactly what change to implement and how to do it. And yeah, I don't know. You're right. I'm sitting here reading this and I'm like, I don't know how to interpret it at all, but it's going to be a line that when we learn everything about Mariska's plans, we're going to be like, oh, okay, that's what she
Yeah.
meant.
Yeah, because as I understand, currently what we understand of her plan is she doesn't give a shit about Kenneth. It's just kind of a stepping stone for her to get away from the court, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd need to reread the chapter to be sure, but maybe we were quick to jump to the conclusion that that meant every aspect of her plan was selfish as
Mm,
hell.
mm,
Like, obviously, there is a core part of her plan that involves just setting good shit up for her and then bailing. But like, this could be one of those tricksy fairy otherverse things. Like with Bristow. Bristow technically made Clem's life better. He could have made it more better than he did,
sure.
but he made it better. Like maybe that's sort of what Marisica's talking about here. Like, is she gonna? She's helping Kenneth in a way that maybe aligns with someone else's. Like maybe it aligns with Mrs. plans, but not in a great way. Just in a way that like technically lets her get away with saying that. I don't know.
Maybe the answer to that is she thinks that the ideal of Kenneth is being bogged down by, Mrs. Plans or whatever, so needs to just be burnt down and start again. I
Yeah,
could see something like that as a way for her to be weaseling out of her words.
yeah. We're just gonna have to wait and see, really. Um,
Yeah.
we also learn here that both Gash and Blunt are involved, although kind of really just as patsies slash like henchmen.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, brought in midsummer as well. Like there is a confirmation that they weren't sort of really properly brought in until after the Kenneteers were awoken, which
Mm,
I don't know if that's better or worse
hmm. Yeah.
because it means they like sort of met and befriended the Kenneteers and then got involved.
Yeah, I don't know. You're right.
Yeah, pretty sad. I'm interested for the Kenneteers to just immediately go talk to them and find out how they were bought and what they're willing to, how they could be bought back.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like they're beyond being reached, does it?
No, but it's interesting that really Marusika's plans seem to hitch on the idea that they're both a little bit jealous or like not on the same wavelength as Toad Swallow, which we did, like we knew about, especially about Blunt. We sort of knew that, and there's no way that that got any better once he became like the head of the Kennet Council.
The mayor. I've been thinking of him as,
yes.
but
Since he became mayor, like that has to have gotten worse.
Yeah, definitely.
So it'll be, I guess really interesting to just talk to them both and sort of see like how much that really is something that's getting under their nerves.
Yeah.
Okay, last little bit of conspiracy stuff here. So Marusika said, kind of explicitly sets up like, the way the others are being, or how some of the new others are tied into the conspiracy. So she says, 2 others in particular will help and another will be steered this way. She then goes on to confirm that like Charles suggesting they make Ken was part of her plan. So we know there's something up with Ken.
Yeah.
We can kind of assume the 2 others who will help are Liz and Sig.
Yep. They've already been caught.
Well, arguably Sig is the one that was steered this way. Because Sig kind of got roped in by Edith. It didn't really seem like he... I mean, the thing with fairies, basically, it's probably pointless at this stage to try and figure out who were the 2 who will help and who was steered this way. Basically, just read it as 3 of them are involved.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so, if we rule out Liz and Sig, I'm kind of like, oh, who do we think the 3rd is?
Jabba, I think, is a strong contender, given what we've been learning about him in the past few chapters and in the next chapter.
Yeah, the way he's come up a number of times now is with Avery's theory of him being a battery. He's like the way he's jumped into the focus that way definitely feels important. My very big brain tinfoil idea is that it's Rook, not as in just like Marusika invited Rook in. I don't know, some fucking 5D chess move, like making Rook and Miss think they had more control than they did. That's the tinfoil answer, anyway.
I think it's a pretty good tinfoil answer. So yes, we then get into our final vignette, the 10th/11th vignette, where Lucy sees Marusika blinding the Carmine, but is pulled out just as it all transpires. We get more confirmation that Charles will be taking the throne, and the chapter wraps up there.
It was the way this one works is basically, as Marusika starts talking, this is when Zed like interrupts to basically tell Lucy what Verona's figured out and that she needs to get out. And it was funny because I was so fucking mad at Zed for interrupting. Like, I was so absorbed in everything Marusika was saying, and I was like, oh my god, this is it. We're learning so much. This is so important. And then Zed was like, hey, Lucy, come in. And I was like, oh, fuck off. Like, you can't interrupt us now. And I thought it was funny because, like, I feel like that's the vibe Walbo exactly wanted you to sort of have, is like, because like the thing that comes up is that Lucy hasn't had one of her own thoughts for a couple of things now. She dove so deep into the Carmine and chasing the conspiracy that she almost got lost. And I did the exact same thing. I stopped thinking about Lucy. I stopped thinking about everything else. I was just relishing learning these answers to the conspiracy. And then Zed came in and I was like, no, you can't do this to us. And he kept talking, he kept being like, it's too late, you've got to come out now. And I was like, I understand what you're saying, but we can't.
We need a few more minutes, few more minutes. No, I don't want to go to school, Zed.
It was perfect. Like it.
Yeah,
you're right. I basically had the same reaction to like if I was in the middle of an important part of a game and somebody came in to talk to me. And it was like, no, not now.
Just come back later.
And it's like, yes, I know this is important, but it still pisses me off.
The second explicit confirmation of Charles being the one taking the throne we've got our tinfoil hats on, is Lucy finishing it, not us seeing it in scene, which is maybe some wriggle room, but feels like it's pretty wild if Lucy just kind of made up the end of that sentence. It feels like it's almost certainly confirmed that at least those three think Charles will be taking the throne.
Yeah, I think the way it's included as the sort of end of the segment and stuff, and like the gravity Lucy gives it as she's like jumping out, it would be weird for it to just be later on we find out she was just wrong. So like, yeah, I agree. I'm inclined to believe that she's right. That's more or less what Mariska was going to say.
Yeah, I think so. Which then sets up the mystery of, like, as we mentioned, Charles, how the hell are you going to do that? Like, and also, it was mentioned before, I should have brought this up in the previous section. It was mentioned that Charles will need to give, like, a key suggestion and make an argument. And so I'm starting to think now that Charles's suggestion was that he be handed over to Ray and, like, take the fall for the Kenneteers, which didn't exactly end up happening, but did end up happening pretty much along those lines, which is maybe intentional.
I thought that was referencing his role in getting Ken involved.
Oh yeah,
because like the description of those series of events sounded like how we had it explained to us that Ken would come in, where basically they said, "Oh, like Charles pitched something and we turned it down, and then we got Ken because of the idea he inspired." And basically, I thought this was basically telling us that that's exactly what Mariska wanted.
Okay, I could see that. I'm just very much diving down the rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's the end of the chapter.
Whew, hell of a chapter. I mean, looking at the time, this might be the longest we've ever gone covering a single chapter. Maybe one packed exception I can think of, but yeah, I like what a chapter. You know, we talked about this so much.
It was a great one.
Yeah, we talked about this so much with like Verona's one last time, but like the way this is just giving so much to us, like in terms of quality content, while also delivering on like the build up and hype and character arcs for a year of the story. It's yeah.
And there's another top tier chapter to come, Elliot. Summer break 13.3. We're in Avery's head. Avery and the others are walking to dinner with a bit of awkward tension in the air.
Yeah, and I think I love the way this chapter sort of really opens with Avery thinking about Avery's basically run off in front, thinking about the fact that often she runs off in front. And like basically she sort of immediately segues this to the idea that that also helps her land back on her feet and get her stability quicker. And then like after that starts talking about like she's talking to Verona and Lucy about like they're not doing so hot since their journeys. And this is the one point in the chapter where both of them are very much on the same page of holy shit, I have a lot to think about. And I like Avery starts to freak out and worry about how it's going to be for her. And I think what's great is this chapter is almost a journey of learning how Avery's actually probably going to be okay. Like the way her alcazaring goes at the end of this chapter, I get the impression that she's going to come out of it the best out of the three of them. Like unless 3.4 comes out and proves me wrong. But I think it's interesting. Like we'll talk about it as the chapter goes on. This chapter's almost preparing her to do a lot better than they did, and I think that's really cool. Like great way to twist it for the third one is to actually have it sort of go fine for the character.
Yeah. Yeah, I was definitely expecting it to go worse, but no, it's just kind of Avery's chill, and possibly because she and the Carmine had more of a link than we thought. So yeah, the gang is all mulling over the idea, as we alluded to, of Charles taking the throne, as well as all the problems with it happening. Like Charles is obviously locked up by Ray right now. Charles would basically die or get consumed and effectively die if he ascended to the throne. It just doesn't feel possible.
Yeah. And so obviously, yeah, we talked about, maybe that is his plan. He wants to go out in glorious purpose. I have a bit more of a tinfoily theory, though, but not too tinfoil. Like that level of tinfoil where it's tinfoil, but I still think it could be true. So Charles mentioned last chapter in one of the flashbacks that he gets protections from Kenneth. Like, he lost some pages, and he sort of said, "Oh, I thought Kenneth was meant to stop that." And Edith said, "Oh, well, what you're doing here isn't in service of Kenneth. So, like, those protection that energy isn't protecting you."
Mm.
And so what that sort of tells us is similar to the Kennetiers, Charles, in his own way, has a way to tap into the collective power of Kenneth. Just he has to explicitly be doing something for Kenneth for that tap to like be available to him. Marisica just pointed out that in a way they're giving Kenneth what it needs. So if he's able to argue that he's doing this for Kenneth, is there a way he can get the furs and the power of Kenneth will also balance out like the Carmine thing and stop it from consuming him? Like, rather than Jabba just being the battery, is part of the battery just Kenneth
The
itself?
town and all the other Kenneth others.
And because if that's the case, then it would suggest that Kenneth, in a way, has a claim to the throne. If Kenneth
Huh.
if Kenneth's energy is controlling Charles in such a way, so this is kind of merging those theories about Ken or the town taking the furs and Charles. I'm basically
Yeah.
saying, what about both?
Yeah.
But in this really indirect way, where Charles is still a Carmine and will function in a way that doesn't challenge the system fundamentally, like a whole town taking it might, but it also still gives the town this sort of direct link to him, allowing him to be corrupt for it or whatever.
Yeah.
I only had this thought like 20 minutes before recording, so I haven't like thought it out fully. Like, I don't know how that ties in thematically or anything yet, but just an idea.
It does answer the question of what's up with Ken, though, which is a question that we do still need an answer to.
I mean, not necessarily, because like he gets the power from the town either way. Like, I don't know how Ken. I suppose Ken would be his link to the town. Like, if he becomes intrinsically linked to Kenneth, maybe he becomes like a sort of permanent aspect of Ken or something.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. That's a wait and seeer, that one. So yeah, the gang bumps into Jeremy, Wallace, and Melissa, and the groups pause for some brief conversation, spiced with a bit of miscellaneous drama.
Yeah, and obviously one piece of drama here is the standout, and we will get to that.
Yes.
But before we do, I do just want to quickly call out this one moment. So Melissa like starts getting real whiny when Mia comes up, and one of my first instincts was to be like, "Oh, Melissa," but when you read it closely, I do actually think like the first time Mia comes up in conversation, Melissa basically says, "Oh, like don't get me started on Mia," which feels like a fairly straightforward message of
Let's
I'm
drop
not
it.
comfortable
Yeah.
talking about her. Like, can we not? And then they just sort of keep doing it anyway. And as much as Melissa's whole beef with Mia is a little bit self-inflicted,
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
yeah. Like, as much as that is like a self-inflicted beef or whatever, I think she pretty reasonably and immediately puts up like a sign saying, "Hey, can we not talk about this?" And it kind of gets ignored by the others. And so, like, yeah, despite that being a self-inflicted issue, I am going to kind of side with Melissa in this instance of her, like, this is not the environment to confront her issue with Mia. So I think it's fair of her to just be like, "Hey, can we not talk about her?" And for the others to probably follow through on that. They can talk, like, Lucy and Wallace can talk about that later.
Yeah.
So just, standing up for Melissa because she's not going to do it herself. She's just going to claim she's a cripple. Even though she's not, she can walk.
Yep. But getting to the main piece of drama, I mean, like, yeah, Lucy's in the wrong on this one, eh?
Oh, yeah.
I'm kind of glad that it's coming to a head a bit so that they can argue their way onto the same page. But I'm also glad we're in Avery's head so we can just not see the fight. I don't feel the need to see it. I'm happy for them to sort it out while we're with Avery.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've sort of mentioned before, I think compared to a lot of people on our Discord, myself and I guess probably the show in general has sort of been a bit more pro Lucy than most people I interact with. But she's absolutely in the wrong in this situation. Like, especially because like I feel like the main reason I'm usually coming down on Verona is I don't think she's been communicating very well with like Jeremy or Lucy about a lot of these things. but she's communicated very clearly this stuff about not wanting to date Jeremy. So like Lucy absolutely has nothing to stand on there. And then we obviously learn later that off screen, Verona did have that talk with Jeremy. Um, and I think there's a more complicated argument to be have about how reasonable it is for Lucy to have expected that. But that said, the solution to not being sure is to ask Verona in private, not pull a stunt like this. So yeah, I don't know. As much as like Verona dug her own grave with this relationship stuff a bit early on, in this chapter, Lucy really just grabbed a shovel and hopped on in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, I can't remember if Megafire in our reflecting episode brought up their long time theory about like viewing Verona and Lucy's relationship as like through the lens of Lucy parenting Verona and Verona not wanting or needing that anymore. So sorry if you have sort of heard about this, but I just I'm finding that a really interesting way to view this conflict. This has been talked about to death on our Discord. I suppose this is already a long ass episode. I won't talk about it too long, but I find it super interesting to think about the way their friendship will have to change based on the fact that Verona doesn't need something that Lucy has sort of been providing for her for a long time. And then I think there's an argument for whether she does or doesn't need it that's interesting, and how like what it should look like. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's been the topic of many a debate in our Discord recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really fun way to view it. It's a really good lens.
Yeah. 100%. I really like it. Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, this is news to us as the audience, and it is news to Lucy as well. I do think Lucy is in the wrong here, but the fact that Verona went and talked to Jeremy hasn't come up before now from our perspective.
Yeah, which I think is very fun because it made me side a little bit more with Lucy. So I still thought what she did was dumb.
Oh yeah, it was definitely out of line.
Yeah, like it was dumb either way, but there was sort of like when Verona reveals that she has talked to her, it's like an extra level of that was even dumber. Because it really reinforces that aspect of it, which is like if you didn't think she had followed up on it, this wasn't the stunt to pull. The stunt to pull was to talk to her about it again in private, not this. And like that aspect of it really reinforces it. And I think this like speaks to that whole aspect of Megafire's lens and just analyzing their friendship's growth in general. Because like some of the arguments on Discord have essentially boiled down to should Verona have sort of felt any obligation to tell Lucy that she talked to Jeremy, like or yeah, which I think is an interesting discussion. Like obviously probably she never had to, but like I don't know. I guess I'd argue that if she found that advice useful in the end, maybe she could have said thanks. I don't know. Yeah. Again, I find this topic really interesting because I kind of go back and forth on it. I've related Verona's situation with Jeremy a lot to a relationship in my past in which I wish I'd listened to the Lucys in my life, which is part of why I think I come down harshly on her. But I can also think about the time when like a Lucy butting in has ruined other relationships. So yeah, I just don't see this as a very black and white issue, and I think that's why I find it so fun to talk about all the time because it's yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's very fun to dive into as well because these are two characters that we respect the moral compasses of to a fair extent, right? So
yeah,
giving them a fun moral argument is always a juicy one.
Yeah, because like at the same time as Lucy is overstepping in a bunch of ways, like there's an argument for Verona like does still need someone to do that every now and then. Or like I think Verona's refusal to talk about this at all is still part of the core problem that's like led to it coming this far. Yeah, which is just so fun because it's like I don't really feel comfortable blaming either of them too much, except in this exact instance where I'm like, Lucy, you're an idiot. But like big picture.
Yeah.
Big picture, I'm like, both of you need to get better at communicating about this.
Yeah.
And this is where I continue to tinfoil. Is this some of that stuff I posited as a theory, I think last arc sometime, that like, because we're in conflict town, is peaceful resolution becoming less and less karmically like good. I
Mm.
tried to think of a better word and I couldn't. Like, more violent endings to stuff like this feels like it becomes more inevitable as the furs paint the town redder.
Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing from this section. In what is quickly becoming a weekly segment, Verona and Jess watch. Um, there's a part where like Jess, sort of joins in the banter with these other six, and sort of smiles at the fact that Bristow got not in a good place. And Verona sort of says, "Oh yeah, bit of a quid pro quo, since I was the one who drove him to that end." And Jessica smiles at this, and I just yeah, I don't know. Again, I feel like there's one of these moments. It's been the last 3 episodes. There's been just one moment where Jess and Verona have had an interaction, and I feel like they're all fucking over the place. I think the first one was like Jess was a little bit iffy on her. Then we had one last week where Jess was like expressly like grilling her and didn't seem cool with her. And now in this one,
Mm.
she's like smiling about Bristow's death, and I was just like, I'm going to continue to follow this because I don't know where it's going, and now I'm even more confused.
Yeah, you're
Like,
right.
what
It's a fun one to watch develop.
Yeah, like Jess is so hard to read. I see what Avery was complaining about in Arc 5 now. So not Arc 5, Arc 6.
Mm.
Um, I can't read Jess at all. So
um,
look forward to this update again next week, I guess. There's going to be one of these moments every week.
yeah, I suspect. So yeah, we skip forward to the dinner. Avery's dad arrives just as the food is finished being prepped.
And oh man, we talked about all the hype for the bloody Carmine, alcazaring.
Mm.
This dinner was also very hyped in my head, and like, oh boy, does it deliver! Like,
Yeah.
this chapter in particular is just Wildbow flexing that thing I know we and Scott and Matt have praised him for a million times, which is not just that he writes these great characters, but he's able to make them bounce off each other in the coolest ways.
Yeah.
Like that's all this chapter is. It's a dinner party, but yet it's some of the most captivating shit. Like,
Man, Wildbow's good at writing compelling dinner parties.
yeah. Like the fact that this dinner party is sitting next to the Alcazar chapter, and I'm not comfortable saying that this is the weaker chapter,
Oh yeah.
is like super impressive. And because it's not just the dinner party, like, we just spent ages talking about, and we kind of skipped over. I mean, that's the other thing I need to mention here. We cannot do this chapter justice in the podcast format because it would involve, like, there's so many threads and things integrating and characters playing off each other. We just can't bring them all up.
Mm.
We'd be here for days.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, it's not just the dinner party. Like, Walbo just had, the other, like, Jeremy, Wallace, and Melissa, like, and there was fun interactions with characters who haven't interacted before there as well. Like, he's just showing off at this point.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Take the deserved victory lap, I think.
Oh yeah, but like, yeah, like these two chapters, it's just amazing that I'd be willing to call them two of the best chapters in the story, and they sit side by
Yeah.
side, and they're completely different, and were hyped for very different reasons, and both deliver. Like, it really showed, like, these two chapters are such a great example of Wildbow's strength and versatility.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. We can't do the whole chapter justice, but we can pull out our favorite parts. And I'd like to start with my personal favorite moment in this chapter, when Avery says, "You didn't bring my siblings, did you?" And her dad says, "First words out of your mouth. I did you one better. I brought 3 Declans and Kerry. They're fighting in the car. Give them a minute. They'll come tearing their way in when they're hungry." I mean, it's just hilarious.
Yeah.
It is maybe not the best thing that I am so ready to believe that he would actually do this, but God, it was so fucking funny.
Yeah, which makes it such a Connor joke because it was like,
Yeah.
at the same time as I'm like, okay, that was pretty good, there's also that part of me that's just like, yeah, but don't you see that the fact that I believed you'd do that is like a problem? I loved this, but yeah, like, because I think in the moment I mostly just felt relieved that Connor suddenly had jokes. Well, no, not suddenly, he's always had jokes, but had good jokes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, this
Yeah.
this was a funny moment, like,
It was wonderful.
because I'm pretty sure we all went through the same fucking emotional roller coaster Avery just did, of like, oh god, and then him just being What a good one.
So from a Connor highlight to just a weird moment, there's that bit where he says, I was going to ask how you're connected. I use the word connected because it's not just meeting, Avery's dad said. He glanced at Avery. I know Avery takes this one way, but I honestly just do not understand what is in his brain here. I really just don't get it.
The very unforgiving read is that it's an extra way of basically trying to quiz them on, as Connor might put it, like what type of queer they are.
Yeah, but then why wouldn't he just say, "How did you all meet?" rather than "How you all connected"? I just don't get it. I don't understand what the differentiation he's trying to set up is.
I think it's because they've come to visit them here in Kennet. Like, obviously,
Right.
they're not just met, but like they're like legit
Yeah.
friends now.
Yeah.
I think that's what he's getting at. But yeah, like it sits right in that middle ground where I'm like, do I take this unforgiving read that he's trying to quiz them more about their queerness, or is it just he's a dorky dad and
Mm.
just phrases things weird? Because this is the sort of weird shit my dad would pull in a very benign situation too. Like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like especially because if you don't take that unforgiving read of it, because I think Avery's response to this is to really cringe, and if
Mm.
you're not taking the unforgiving response, the unforgiving reason, I'm sort of like, well, to be fair, isn't the whole point of this dinner basically these parents meeting the significantly older teenagers who are now seemingly really close with their 13-year-old daughters? Like,
Mm.
I think Connor asking more about how, like, they ended up really good friends with the Kenneteers makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely makes sense to ask how these, late teenagers are friends with your young teenaged children.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bree. We then get to this bit where Bree thanks the Kenneteers for the fact that she is healthy and alive, with Zed and Jess stepping in to also offer cryptic thanks where they can. And it's a bit weird and tense, but very kind and a very sweet moment.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah. There's not really anything more you can say about it. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, you can kind of tell that it's probably going to cause some problems for Lucy, but it is very nice to get the trio some validation on their approach of being super friendly and helpful actually panning out, actively, especially Avery, right? Who is the poster child for that.
Yeah, well, especially because, like, yeah, as you said, the downside is, well, like Lucy as the Kenneteer with the good parent, um, is going to have to deal with the aftermath because, like, Jasmine has accurately realized that there is definitely a pattern where these things are sneaking out and getting into weird slash dangerous shit. And I think the great thing about her getting like harder on them on that is that like she is just objectively correct in that assessment. So they can't really fight her on it. Like Jasmine coming to them and saying, "You have to
Mm,
tell me what all this weird shit is." She's totally in the right. But I love that because it's Jasmine, I can rest confident that what also didn't go past her is the fact that, even when they're getting angry at people who hurt dogs, and even when they're saving Bree from the streets, eh, like they're doing good things. So
yeah.
like I could trust that Jasmine's going to come at this from like, hey, you guys are clearly doing a lot of good, but like I have to question why you're sneaking out into the middle of the night and going into weird places, and that's
I mean, it's a fair question.
yeah, exactly. Like she's objectively right to question that, but I can at least rest comfortable with Jasmine knowing that the good parts of what they're doing won't go uncredited.
Mm,
Whereas like Connor took like the incomplete but nice take of he just noticed the good that they're doing.
yeah.
He completely missed the fact that his daughter is like running around the streets at night and
Classic Connor.
whatever the fuck. But
Yeah.
um, take what you can get with Connor is sort of my uh my general stance.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of, Avery and Connor step outside to speak, and Avery tells him that she wants to move to Thunder Bay. Connor is still himself, but he's clearly incredibly proud of her for everything.
Yeah, like this is just a really touching
Yeah.
moment that's really good for both Avery and Connor. Like,
Yeah.
I I love. Well, I guess just to start with, like, I think ever since like how we talk about the girls and stuff, I feel like in general I tend to be quite forgiving of Connor,
Mm.
and I think like even though his progress tends to be slow slash bumpy, especially like the last few arcs, but I think part of it is because I definitely see both of my parents in Connor in that like
Mm.
my parents are definitely that same sort of like, I think they mean well and their hearts are in the same place. Sorry, their hearts are in the right place and they mean well, but like, my parents definitely like grew up, and they got good jobs and they got married and they had a family, right? The sort of classic American dream sort of shit. Um, and when that just hasn't really been challenged by the time you're in your like 40s or whatever, it
Mm.
you know,
You
it's a
get
muscle.
set in your headspace pretty,
Yeah, like
don't you?
it's a muscle you've never used, and as a 40-year-old, like, because I think it's easier for like people like our age and younger to just sort of get frustrated, but especially remembering the internet didn't exist, so like when all media was coming through certain lenses, it made it very easy to never have to think about this stuff in a way that mattered.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. I find myself just sort of like, even though Connor's not well far from perfect, like the fact that he seems to be trying and his heart is in the right place and he's getting there and he's moving in the right direction, I just can't help but be like proud of those each of those small steps.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think it's fortunate for Connor where he's in a position where the fact that he is potentially slow to learn is not doing a huge amount of damage. I mean, it'd be easy to be
Well,
much more judgmental of him if it was doing more damage. But I think his relationship with Avery is impacted by this, of course, but is from Avery's reactions in this chapter seems like it's the fact that he's going in the right direction clearly means a lot to Avery, right?
yeah, I mean, I'd actually push against the idea that it's not doing any damage because if you remember that whole thing with Declan when Verona came over like an arc and a half ago, um, like things got pretty bad around then. That was when she made this decision; she had to leave.
Yes, sorry, I should
Um,
clarify. I don't mean it's not doing any damage. Just
yeah,
it's not that. Yeah, I don't know. Like
I think the
it could
fact
be a
that
lot
he's
worse.
yeah, I think the fact like what he sort of did in this chapter is really like one of the first things she says when he rocks up is that he dressed nice. Like he came and he took this seriously. And in this whole conversation, like my big takeaway is he really listens to everything she says and actually takes
Yeah,
it in.
yeah.
And like that, like it's sort of like I think somehow he's realized he wasn't doing a good enough job before and he's
Mm,
kind of stepped it up a bit. And like that's that part to me where it's just like, that's what we need. And like, yeah, it would have been a lot better, obviously, if he could have gotten there 2 arcs ago. Um, but like I don't know, I guess hating him for getting there late isn't going to help. Like
mm,
it just it ties in, I guess, to what Lucy was talking about last chapter. Like this idea that like you can't just sort of fix the system right away. Like I think it's John who sort of talks to Lucy like you can implement change, but it's going to be slow and hard. And I guess that's sort of my opinion of stuff like Connor. Like it sucks that he can't just get his act together straight away. But the fact that he comes here and he is trying, and even if it is a bit late, he is putting in the effort means something.
mm. Yeah, yeah,
That said,
definitely.
I would never like Avery is not super thrilled about it, and I would never tell Avery to feel that way. Like this is coming from somebody on the outside who's maybe just like would be trying to help push Connor. Like with my parents, I
Mm,
always constantly like poking and prodding them in a more direct or asking them to question things, right? And like
mm,
but I would never ask Avery to just be like, oh, just give Connor time. He'll get there. Like it's understandably like hurtful that it takes him time to sort of get to grips with like everything she's going through. So yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I do really like the way Avery very calmly and firmly pushes back on a lot of the things he says here.
Mm,
Like he'll say, like he makes that joke about Sheridan when he's
yes.
complimenting her.
Oh,
Um,
Avery's so good.
yeah, and Avery's just sort of like, "Hey,
Uh,
Sheridan did help me out," and he does take that thing to just be like, like, okay, yeah, you know what, like fair, like Sheridan is good in her own way. Like you know, he just had to make one of his stupid Connor jokes, and Avery sort of calls him out on it, and he's sort of like, yeah, okay, fair.
Mm.
And I was like, that's the sort of shit that like is going to work, and it's really impressive that Avery's able to do that, and I'm glad that he's taking this stuff on board finally, and hopefully moving forward.
Mm. Yeah. Um, yeah. This was a nice moment, a nice scene. It really was kind of bittersweet in interesting ways. Avery's dad clearly loves her a lot and is very proud of her, but yeah, obviously that household isn't great for Avery, and so moving is almost certainly the right thing for her.
Yeah, there's like, as nice as it is that Connor kind of had his shit together at this dinner tonight. It's like, unless he's coming back with like a 10-step plan on how the household's going to get better, it doesn't really change Avery's core point about why she needs to leave. Like he does sort of say here in this night, like, I'll try and get better about your grandpa and Declan and Kerry.
Mm.
But it's like I'd want to, I believe that he means that here and now, but it's easier said than done.
Yeah, 100%. We don't necessarily have faith in him to actually do what he says he's going to do.
Yeah, like even upholding it for the week that Avery's still going to be here is arguably not a consistent and long term enough change in behavior for me to believe that it's still recommended she stay here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose the other thing here is just like I do again want to sort of give both of them credit, like Avery for just having that courage to just tell him no, like I'm not happy because of this XYZ, and him when they're alone like this, taking like just trusting and sort of respecting her concerns. Like there's a even after he says, "Oh, I don't really want to like try and like convince you to stay. Like if you need to
Mm.
go, that's fine." But he still listens to what her problems are, which like gives me this hope
Mm.
that he still wants to address them even if Avery leaves,
Yeah.
which is like that's a very good sign.
Yeah.
Hopefully he can stick that landing.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, just the way he's sort of like the way he's like, oh, you've grown so much over this summer, and I don't know everything that's happening, but like I'm so proud of you. Like it's just such a heartwarming scene.
Yeah. Yeah. Now having said that, anytime Avery thinks about moving, it reminds me, it like gives me the thought of whether this is all just part of a Marisica plan, like going all the way back to the "you'll never find love in Kennet" thing. Is Marisica behind all this? Did Marisica somehow break up Avery's parents?
um, yeah. Well, the other did Marisica sort of seed this idea? Well, I think Avery explicitly called back to that Marisica moment when she first sort of came up with this idea. So, like the idea that Marisica could have seeded the thing that she needs to leave with the hope that it would cause conflict with the trio seems to
Mm.
be working. Um, I think there are actually a few points in this chapter that make it worth stopping for like a second and actually asking the question, "Hey, is Avery leaving actually the right move?" Because I think we all sort of unanimously came down on yes when all that shit show happened with like Declan and Kerry.
Mm.
And maybe it's because we're a bit distanced from them now that I'm
Yeah.
more and we just had a really nice moment with Connor that
We
I'm like,
haven't seen them in like a whole arc, right? So
yeah. And because Connor just did well for the first time, it's sort of easier to romanticize her home. But like, it is worth stopping and asking, like, is her leaving good? Because she sort of had that like the last POV chapter we have with Avery at the end of False Moves. It sort of ended with her having that revelation about like not wanting romance quite yet because she had to sort of readjust how she was processing that. And I guess trying to do something like that, like completely reassess the way you consider relationships while also moving somewhere new and having to make new friends, like that's doing that on hard mode. She already struggled the last time she moved to a new place, right? Like I'm sure she'll be better this time, but I'm kind of like, there's an argument for if she's trying to rebalance herself and think about how she handles relationships, doing that with friends like Lucy and Verona by her side would almost certainly be easier, you'd think.
mm, I mean, yeah. I kind of have been raising the same questions in my mind for sure.
Yeah. Well, and like, and to possibly read into stuff like the way that Carmine dies later on. One of the things that Carmine really keeps thinking about is the fact that she's dying alone because for one reason or another, she kind of pushed everyone away.
Mm.
And part of me, like, it's probably a very unfair read, but you could make the argument that like Avery running to Thunder Bay or whatever is maybe like nudging herself in a bit of like that territory, like, you know, trying to break away to get away from the bad people. She's also leaving the good. Um,
Mm.
maybe Snowdrop. We still don't know if Snowdrop's planning on coming with her or not. I think yes, but um, I mean, how do you keep an opossum in an apartment? I don't understand what the plan is there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, I honestly find myself like there are actually a few reasons to think that her leaving isn't the greatest idea, but there's also a lot of reasons why it's good. So it'll be interesting to see how it actually goes and see how talking it out with fucking anyone that actually matters happens, because she still hasn't told like Lucy and Verona, she hasn't told Toad Swallow.
Mm.
Like yeah.
Yeah. Um, so
Oh,
from
sorry,
here,
no.
oh
Before you go, final shout out from this moment. I just want to say Cherry Pop still has her rock.
yeah, that rocks. That Chekhov's rock, we call it. It's coming back in the finale.
I'm on honestly at this point I'm like 50-50 on whether it's a Chekhov's rock or whether it's just like, funny that Jerry Pop's still carrying around this cursed rock.
So yeah, it's Avery's turn to get into the Alcazar to see the night of the murder.
Yeah, and I love how this like almost comes out of nowhere. I wasn't even sure it was going to be in this chapter anymore because of where my
Mm.
scroll bar was by the time
Yeah,
I got here. Like
yeah,
it's the hype for the Alcazars had dominated this arc so much so far that I love that for the third one, it's the afterthought it's the dessert to the dinner scene.
mm. Yeah. Um, God, the thing that really hit me about this start of this Alcazar thing is the Carmine's thinking about how uh, she has been attacked for like a solid day. She has been being bitten by the
Yeah.
Hungry Choir for a day because it takes a day to get anywhere from her domain. So it's taken her a day to get into Kennet for help. And like, I guess we knew that already, but hearing it from her perspective, it just is so fucked.
Yeah, like this scene, almost just the entirety of this scene is just drilling into you as much as it can, like a massive sense of like despair and hopelessness. Like hopelessness, very literally, because we learned that Marisica blinded her to hope. But
Mm,
like, fuck, that really comes through, and just yeah, how shitty it is from the get go. Like, yeah, we open with they've been eating me alive for a day, and I think it gets worse from there.
yeah. Um, yeah, it does. So, yeah, the Carmine is struggling, reaches the arena, and reaches out to Miss for help. Miss does nothing, and the Carmine dies within arm's reach of Avery.
Yeah, and this is just like such a massive moment because of like the way it's like, this is us seeing from her perspective the prologue. Like there's a sense of satisfaction and like completeness to finally getting this moment and having like some big things tie together and getting a sense of like, okay, we sort of have a picture for what happened back then. Like it's very narratively satisfying to get this moment of like seeing the death
Mm,
in the proper way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting. It really recontextualizes the death, seeing it from the victim's perspective, doesn't it? Like, um, I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible that this is Alcazar shenanigans and that the Carmine didn't see Avery so much when she died, but I'm kind of choosing to believe this is very much how it happened. And there's some really strong poetry in the fact that the Carmine died. Yeah, like, and Avery was there and Avery saw it and felt it happen to an extent.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Like, because we're not just getting the narrative tie on like us seeing the murder, but also it ties into like, yeah, like Avery seeing herself at the start of her journey to get here. Because as Connor brings up in this chapter, like Avery has grown so much in this story, and you can see why she was Mrs. First Pick. I mean, compare Avery now to who she was before. I think there's a reason that she's the one who seems to have the easiest time going through this Alcazar. It's because there's like, I, th- I think at this stage, out of the three of them, she might be the one who's the most okay.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and, and that's just like it's so great to sort of symbolize that by having this big story moment end with her looking at like her past self and just like getting to recognize how far she's come. Yeah, like, I feel like a broken record talking about these alcazar moments, but the way they just bring everything together, like character threads, the story hype, like everything, it's just so good.
Yeah. Um, but the other thing I like about this is the Carmine chooses to die in a very bloody and disruptive way, like just to fuck over the area.
Yeah, so this was something that didn't really click for me the first time I read it, but like, so basically, when the Hungry Choir was eating it, it was like the power was just getting absorbed into the Hungry Choir. So
Mm,
her like munching on herself, that's basically what caused the blood spillage and the furs that we have today. Or like, if the Carmine Beast hadn't done this, if the Hungry Choir had had the time to just eat her all, it would have just all been stored in the Hungry Choir, I guess, is my
yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, possibly.
Um, which is interesting. This is one of those things where like the Carmine thinks that it's disrupting Maricica's plans doing this sort of stuff, but just like looking at the story, I don't think it really was. Like,
Mm,
I think it dying in Kennet, it like giving the furs out, were at least contingencies she'd planned for.
yeah, 100%.
Um, yeah, like the version of the story where the Carmine Beast just gets eaten by the Hungry Choir without like anyone noticing is probably like
Mm,
the easy, boring version for Maricica.
mm, yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe it wouldn't have gone unnoticed. Like, here's the big brain play by Maricica. If the Carmine Beast had just sat there getting munched on for like a week, somebody might have come and noticed, like right at the last minute. Maybe not been able to save her, but like been able to stop the Hungry Choir or something. I don't know. Like maybe the culprits are actually counting on her ending it quicker.
Mm.
Anyway, I do love it as a fuck you move. Like, what a way to go.
Yeah,
Just as like, you
100%.
can't eat me if I eat me and spill my guts everywhere, you idiots.
That'll show him. That'll show him, Carmy. um, so yeah, other fun thing that we learn here: Miss let the Carmine die because she thought it would work better with her plans. That's pretty harsh, Miss.
Yeah. Be easier to comment on this if we knew what those fucking plans were, miss. But I mean, honestly, this coming from the woman who like awoke a handful of 13-year-olds, knowing they'd probably have to fight a fairy. Like, at this point, I'm assuming Miss probably clocked Maricica as a villain pretty early.
Mm,
Um, so I guess in a way, what I'm saying is, it's like, as much as we love Miss, it's actually not news that she can be quite morally not great at times. Like awakening the Kenneteers the way she did. I mean, obviously, it seems like it's probably going to work out pretty well, but like, in the real world, it very well could not have, and that's a pretty shitty thing to do.
yeah.
Like, I'm still on Charles's side. When Charles was like 13-year-olds, are you serious? Like, even after everything we've learned about Charles and Miss, I'm still on Charles's side on that one.
Yeah, I mean, Miss was just here chilling and checking out Avery as a potential candidate before the Carmine even died. So Mrs. Shenanigans run pretty deep.
Yeah. I think what's interesting, so Miss was already here looking at Avery. Was Miss planning on awakening a practitioner before the Carmine died?
I
Or
mean,
like,
that's
was
what that
she just,
implies, right?
yeah, or did she just keep her eyes out in general? Like, because obviously, like, Marissa knew she would
True.
awaken a practitioner.
Yeah.
Um, so like, at the very least, there's sort of this sense of like, Marissa knew that if she killed the Carmine Beast, Miss would awaken a practitioner. That part tracks, but it's curious that Miss was already watching Avery
Mm,
before she
ready
knew the
to
Carmine
go.
Beast had
Yeah.
died.
Yeah.
Like, I don't quite know what that tells us about her plans, but it feels like something.
Yeah. It does. You're right. I don't quite know how to put it together either.
I also love that Miss seemingly added Verona and Lucy to the docket to fuck Marissa over. Um, which I think makes sense because the one weakness we sort of heard about with Marissa is she's not that good with like humans yet. So I
Yeah.
just love the idea of like Miss being like, oh, she probably thinks she can handle my one practitioner. Fuck it, I'll do 3.
Chuck a few more on the
Yeah.
Barbie. Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's so great. But I'm curious, like, what Mrs. plans might have been for Avery when she was just going to have one practitioner.
Mm. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
like,
know.
yeah, and like the Carmine says, oh, this is better for Mrs. Plans if I'm not on the throne. And it's sort of like, well, what are Mrs. Plans? Like, how is the Carmine factored into Mrs. Plans? How is Avery / any other practitioner factored? What are Mrs. Plans? Damn it, Miss.
We'll find out eventually,
I'm
I'm sure.
starting. I'll get real annoyed at Miss for not telling. Actually, no, I'm getting annoyed at the Kenneteers for not asking.
Yeah, true.
Hopefully Avery will now that she just
Now that
watched
she's
Miss.
seen this a bit more.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
I just think it's funny because like, sorry, I'm backtracking a little bit, but like, I think like we often sort of talk about how Rook can be a bit like heartless and, in some ways like
Mm,
blinded by her biases. Although obviously once we went that she was on Mrs. Side, we went that wasn't quite as true. But like, I guess we sort of had it even after that reveal, we had it read as like, oh, Miss is the nice one and Rook is the kind of mean one, but they're mostly on the same page. Moments like her watching the Carmine die and doing nothing and remembering she woke 13-year-olds, we probably shouldn't be so quick to make out like Miss is the nice one and Rook is the harsh one. They're kind of both. Like Miss just really cares for the Kenneteers specifically, and they're the POVs of the story. So
mm,
it's easier for us to have a nice opinion of her because she does sacrifice herself for them. But in general, she's probably not that much less heartless than Rook.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, after we see this effectively letting the Carmine die. No, not effectively, just doing it. Yeah, it's harsh. Um, the near the end, we get this other interesting moment that I think again we already knew, but seeing it from the Carmine's perspective is very interesting to me. Um, we kind of see Avery, who has just had her photo taken, and that's we already knew that this was on the same night as the Carmine's death, but it seems to have been so close to the death of the Carmine. Like the Carmine was literally there when the photo was taken, right? I mean, I wonder
Yeah.
if going back to the alcazar that we did for Lucy's implement ritual would have any other clues that we might have missed just because it's so close to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that was the thing where we really wanted that Edith was involved, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe there's more. I mean,
Mm.
didn't they kind of break that up though? Now it's in Lucy's earring, isn't it?
Yes, they did. Hmm. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Yeah. Anyway, great chapters this week, huh?
Yeah, this is the longest episode we've had in a very long while.
Mm.
And it's because both of these chapters were big and important and good.
Mm. Yeah. Now we have been talking about doing a mailbag for 2 weeks, so it's time to get into it. We got a lot of questions, so we're going to skip doing predictions this week, and we'll get back to some prediction callouts next week.
Yeah,
But
this
should we?
this is still going to be a long ass section.
Yeah, we've still got.
It's gonna
We're
be a
about
long episode.
2/3 through our notes, and we're already at 2 hours of recording. So yeah, thanks everyone for sending in your questions. A lot of really really fun questions here. Should we get into some of them?
Yeah.
Let's start off with David L. Hunt, who asked, "What would a system of rehabilitative justice look like in the Otherverse, and how would that system be put into place?"
My first answer to that is that's Pale's job. That's what it's going to tell us.
Yeah,
It's going
yeah.
to give us a
Stay
nice
tuned,
tight.
David L. Hunt, because you'll
Yeah,
get an answer to that.
we're going to get. I think we talked about this in the thing with Snowdrop's Tiny Fan. We'll just get a nice ribbon. Plus,
Mm.
we'll learn the solution to everything. No, but for real. Yeah, I don't know. This is a really good question.
Yeah, I thought it was a great question. Maybe it would be a good discussion question in the future. But yeah, I just kind of feel like the current system that is so punishing to people who break the key tenet of truth is just not ever going to have a strong system of rehabilitative justice. Like Charles can't come back from where he's at. Seth
Well, no,
can't come back.
it's explicitly punitive
Yeah.
as it stands. Yeah.
And so I mean, we touched on this, I think last week, 2 weeks ago, but the idea of tying power to like representation democratically, as the Kenneteers are doing, I think feels like it's a system. I mean, obviously, democracy, especially capitalist democracies, have their own set of problems, but it feels like a system that at least encourages you to be a champion to a group of people. Like I don't know, it feels like there's more ways that it can go right if your power is based on people putting their faith in you, then even after you fuck shit up, if you right that wrong in the eyes of the people who need to put their faith in you, then that's rehabilitation.
Yeah. That's an interesting idea. Like, I guess, yeah, you just sort of, you really need to set it up as a good system so that, because I guess for me, like the the issue comes in, like, when you do look at someone like Charles, who has kind of at this point established a pattern of making this same mistake a handful of times now.
Mm,
Like I almost don't even sort of feel qualified to say how do you put that person in a situation where they can unlearn that habit.
mm,
Um, like I think someone like Charles, I should be stripped of like the title practitioner, maybe just from like at least temporarily. Like the idea that you shouldn't be trusted with this power right now makes a lot of sense.
mm,
So like, when someone fucks up, like diminishing, yeah, that power, which I guess like your thing would do. It's just interesting to think about, like, yeah, how you ensure that them doing the right thing is becoming like something that they're actually doing because they're changing for the better, and not just like cheating their way to the top of the system to then like quickly use the power to make a stupid mistake.
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, because I think what's really interesting is like we talked about it early in the episode, but the thing that keeps coming up at the moment is the idea that like this thing that's basically creating like the metaphor of like truth in the context of practitioners and others as a sort of stand-in for like the rule of law slash like the
Mm,
stability of the economy, like the sort of this idea that when society is built on something like that, trying to remove it involves a lot of reorganization and is probably going to be a painful process.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but like, and so part of me thinks, well, as long as like truth is treated in the way it currently is rehabilitative justice. Or I guess when David asks how would that system be put into place, I think the first thing we need to look at is like how can we
How can we tear down the existing system?
yeah, how can we erode this reliance on truth as it currently stands and replace that with something else? That would have to be the first thing, because the way truth currently operates, it I mean it encourages bullshit. Like people like the fairy almost thrive because they're able to manipulate the concept of truth. Like I mean if only the fucking spirits could go based on the spirit of what you're saying, not the fucking technical truth.
Mm,
Um, like that would be a huge step for me. I think like people's words being given weight based on like what they're implying or what they're meaning to say rather than what they technically said.
mm.
Then
Yeah.
obviously you run into problems of like when there's confusion, and somebody like honestly misinterprets you.
Yeah.
I also think, and this is super yuck in a number of ways, but there needs to be a discussion about and actually I think this ties into a later question, but I wrote it at the top here before reading that one. But like when you have someone like Rook who can change others, like in the context of rehabilitative justice for others, at some point you need to have the conversation about at what point is it okay to have only like Rook change someone by force to remove an aspect of themselves.
Mm,
Like I'm thinking of, um, like say like an early version of John, right? Like we've talked about this moral debate of someone like John, where you have these violence animi or
mm,
anima, and they can grow into a John, but people have to die on the way for them to get there. And so it's like, is it more ethical if one of them appears to let someone like Rook change it, like potentially by force, into something different that is more healthy for society? Like, where do you draw that line? Um, it's very hard to draw it almost anywhere without bringing some really yuck pictures into the equation. But like, at the same time, there are definitely situations where it feels like a tool that could be useful.
mm.
Like I think the first time we heard about it being used was that time. Wasn't there like a boogeyman or like some evil person from the abyss, and Rook like took the abyss out and made them like friendly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess this ties into another question we got from Sengachi, which was
Yeah,
in the other verse, we have seen that the direct modification of both others and people is possible, Edith, Rook, etc. What use and possible ethical drawbacks would that have as part of a system of rehabilitative justice? And I think this
yeah,
ties into what you're saying.
yeah. Sorry, yeah. This is the question that I read after I wrote all this and was like, oh, I should move my answer, and then I forgot.
I,
Yeah,
like, we live in a society, Elliot, that values bodily autonomy, right?
yeah,
Like, you can refuse life-saving medical treatments. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so, like, being put in prison is already a removal of your autonomy, but that's kind of the point at which we've decided as a society it's all right, I guess. Now,
like my argument for something like that tends to be like the reason you're isolating people should be like in an ideal situation for me to protect everyone else. Like, if
yes,
somebody is a serial killer, you isolate them to protect everyone else. But then also, I think rather than locking them in a cell and throwing away the key, you're meant to be like trying to fix them. And
yeah,
and so for me, where this rook stuff comes in is like at what point, like if somebody is just a serial killer and that's a biological thing, like there's all that stuff about how their brains are different, they can't feel empathy.
yeah.
Um, if somebody's like that, like at what point do you say, oh well, let's just let Rook at them and she can take this part out, put this part in, and then they'll be fixed, even if they don't want it.
I don't know. I think like, assuming that we put aside all the arguments around like, then that just means whoever's in power gets to decide what the rules for normal are. I mean, there's obviously really
Yeah,
funky arguments there, but
exactly.
putting that all aside and assuming we would only ever apply it judiciously and justifiably based on whatever, um, I don't know. It's such a problematic can of worms to open of like forcibly changing who somebody is. Like effectively, depending on what you believe, that effectively is saying we're killing somebody and replacing them with a different version of themselves. Like what?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. It's. I
depending on
just
the
think it's just too funky to ever be on the side that you should be able to do it.
Yeah, I kind of find myself thinking in theory it's something I want to support, but like trusting anyone to draw the line of when we get to do it,
Mm,
I can't think of anyone I trust to draw that line, including
mm,
myself. So like I'd almost hesitate to want to support it as a method of justice simply because I don't know who I would trust to decide when it should and shouldn't be used.
mm.
Because like every form of justice is error prone, and like using this at the wrong time is an awful, awful outcome.
Let me ask
Um,
you this question, Elliot. Let's say you were somebody that had been deemed to have some kind of problematic element, right? For a
yeah.
hypothetical, but it's an element of your personality that you can maybe change through hard work. Let's say.
So that's the thing. I would assume that this system would be after it's been ruled out that like rehabilitation via normal means is possible.
Mm,
So John reached the point where he was able to become somebody I would classify as like a good person,
mm.
more or less, like once he reached a certain point. So, like, John post killing that one kid whose heart he got, I think there's like that is a John who I would say you're able to get and be like, oh, without altering you, we can turn you into someone who's good.
But I think there's an argument to be made that, like, we as human beings, and we're getting a bit tangential, but I think it's an interesting conversation. We as human beings, like, I don't know, I feel like I, as a person, learn through mistakes, right? And that means that if I have some problematic element that is damaging to society, the only way I'm going to improve on my own through rehabilitation is inherently by doing some form of damage, hopefully minimal, to society, to people, to whatever, right?
Yeah, I feel like I was considering different degrees of crime. Like I'm more
Sure,
thinking along the
sure.
lines of serial killers and stuff rather than like yeah, I don't know. Like somebody who makes a normal mistake.
Right, but the
Um
point I want to make, I guess, is as if it's, let's say it's a serial killer and we want them to get better, to improve themselves. I
yeah.
think maybe that it won't be killing people, but I think there will be some level of harm that they do to society on that journey. And maybe the shortcut of changing their brain is worth cutting off that amount of
Yeah,
harm, again,
I
even if
see what
it's
you're
not
saying.
actually murdering people. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
like
But then
this is
once
where
you've
we
started going down that path,
yeah,
then the next interpretation is, well, okay, rather than take the risk of anyone doing harm, we should just make everybody into this exact
exactly.
version of what we want. And like, I think each of those are logical steps, but it's you've gone down the path that is just so clearly incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like even when you hit that point where
I
you're
mean,
saying like,
yeah.
"Oh, how do we juggle the amount of pain each person's doing?" Like, or is it worth turning the serial killer into someone else early to prevent the damage they might do along the way? Even then, for me, I'm like, okay, where are we drawing that line on how much damage that has to be before that's the tool we use? And then we're back at the thing where it's like, I don't know who I trust to draw that line. Let's not do this because I'm not happy with any line drawing.
And I'd just like to take this opportunity to say I really like the movie Gattaca. So if you haven't seen Gattaca, you should check it out. It's a good film.
I'm glad I wasn't the only one who had Gattaca in the back of my mind as we were having this conversation.
I mean, that's effectively the core moral question at the root of Gattaca, right?
We are essentially talking about what's the word for it?
Like genetic modification type stuff.
Oh, not just genetic modification, but eugenics.
Yes, definitely.
Sorry, my brain is very not working today. This was the worst day for us to have such a long episode.
Anyway,
so I do want to raise one other thing on this topic. That's very specific to the Otherverse. Just the extra wrinkle for using someone like Rook or whatever in this situation is things in the Otherverse don't like disappear, right? Like when they said when Rook took the abyss out of that guy and turned him into like a fun clown or whatever. She kept the abyss for later. And so like that's the other aspect of this. Like if we stick to like the serial killer analogy we've sort of been using, if you take the serial killer energy out of everyone, like I'm definitely blending the metaphor here, but like what you're gonna have is this huge stockpile of volatile serial killer energy, which is like are we launching that into space? That's like nuclear waste level, not good, right? Like,
sure.
Like so that that's sort of an otherversey practical implementation question I'd have is like, if we're taking all this bad stuff out, I think in the Otherverse it has to go somewhere, and like that's an interesting problem to have. Is like without that slow process of making everyone better, the amount of badness in the world doesn't just like suddenly go down.
Yeah, that badness needs to be processed somehow, I suppose.
Yeah.
Interesting thought. Vice Versa asks if the girls' choices had been different, talking about their choices of, Lucy doing the implement, Avery doing familiar with Snowdrop, and Verona theoretically doing the domain with the house on Half Street. If the choices...
it's certainly the one she's considered the most.
Yes. If they're kind of matches, and we've seen, I guess the wider thing that Vice Versa was saying is, the fact that that's the rituals each of the three are doing has really shaped themes around those characters, and they are asking, if they were doing different domain rituals, how might the story have warped to facilitate that, basically. So I was kind of thinking about Lucy and John's relationship. I think we saw in these chapters the theme in Lucy's life of like when to let things morally slide as versus when to fight the battles and have to fight the battles. And I think if Lucy decided to do the familiar ritual with John, I think that would have brought that theme to the forefront a lot more and a lot earlier, since John is, like a murderer. I think that's how I would have seen that play out for Lucy, at least.
Yeah, I think it might have also placed even more emphasis on a thread that did come up this week, which is, I guess, her relationship with like father figures and the fact that she's had so many of them, like let her
true.
down.
Good call.
Like something that has kind of shaped Lucy's life in a lot of ways is that she's basically just sort of had a lot of men let her down, and the one who didn't was taken from her, like unfairly and cruelly. So I like the idea that then she'd suddenly have John with her all the time for life would, I mean, like that would be huge. And if that had happened earlier in the story, it would definitely have shaped who she was and how she interacted with everyone.
Yeah. And now that you've called that out of him more actively, God, it's good that Lucy has such a positive role model in Zed of like healthy male masculinity character to 100%. Be there. Like I'm trying to think, and I guess Wallace is another positive interaction that she is having with a character who is a man and, like, you know, as a teenage boy has to play into stereotypes of masculinity in potentially a toxic way, but also is clearly quite a sweetheart and uh, a good influence on her, hopefully a good kind of positive role male
Yeah.
figure in her life.
A thread that never went anywhere was her like little thing with one of the Leos brothers. I can't remember which one it was. But remember she like sort of was maybe flirting with one of them, and everyone kept saying they're really bad news and couldn't help
Yes,
herself.
true.
And then that was a thread I thought might come back in the story at some point, but it seems like it probably won't now. Um, but yeah, like that was an interesting side to this part of her was like she almost from the start was acknowledging that she was kind of attracted to this guy who she knew was not good for her.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That relationship maybe would have taken center stage a bit more actively if those were the themes we were going down.
Yeah. Um, I think like another sort of obvious answer is considering if Avery had gone for a domain, she's obviously as well as like the focus on like her issue with like personal relationships. Um, she's obviously also struggled with like her concept of place, and especially right now, she's struggling with her concept of home. Um, so like that might have happened earlier. I could see Wildbow um pulling the string on like having Kelsey move away much earlier if Avery was considering a domain. And then yeah, just her whole thing with arrivals and departures and yeah, her sense of like belonging to a place would I guess would have been more prominent if she'd gone for a domain, I reckon.
Mm. Mm.
I don't know how Avery would go with an implement.
Yeah, I don't know.
Whereas like I guess sorry, I'm just trying to work through all the permutations. So like Lucy with the domain, I don't want to consider that one because presumably that would involve her having a tougher time at home. Like it would bring Lucy's like I think we talked about this in Arc 2. Our theory was that Lucy might get a domain because she was the only one who had a home she liked. And so I guess
Mm.
my assumption now is that if she'd gotten a domain and like put it in her mum's place or whatever, um, there would have been more trouble at home for her,
Mm.
which I don't like. So I'm glad we didn't do that one.
Yeah. Me too.
What about Verona?
I don't know. I still don't really believe Verona's going to get a domain, to be honest. So
Yeah,
I
like
just,
for me, Verona's journey has sort of fundamentally been or such a large part of her journey has fundamentally been figuring out who and what she wants to be,
mm,
and sort of figuring out does she even want to pick a path like that,
yeah.
and that was what came up in her last chapter.
I feel like I could see a world where Verona goes down getting a familiar, probably Tash, and has a very similar relationship to Avery and Snow in that Avery's relationship with Snowdrop has really allowed her to figure out what it is that she actually wants from relationships with people in her life. And I think
Yeah,
Verona, outside of her relationships with Avery and Lucy, doesn't have a lot of strong relationships that she can kind of look to and think, okay, this is helping me figure out the kind of person I want to be. So I think that could possibly be what her themes could have revolved around if she had gone down that path. Yeah.
yeah. Well, especially because like to go back to the whole like Verona and Lucy thing that's currently going on. Like the scene with Tashlit in Arc 10 is like the one time I feel like we've seen Verona actually happily and healthily communicate about what's going on with her and Jeremy. Like she was just her relationship with Tashlit was one where she could talk about that and regardless of who you blame and how much for Lucy not being a relationship she's comfortable doing that with. It's like I don't think Verona or really any of them have talked to Tashlit for quite a while at this point. Where's Tashlit these days? I have no fucking idea.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, if Tashlit was around all the time because she was a familiar, I think Verona's stuff with Jeremy would be a lot more solid, and there'd be way less conflict about it because Verona would actually be talking to the person she seems to be willing to talk about with it, to like sort it all out,
Mm.
and it'd be easier for her to tell Lucy like what she needs to, or to tell Lucy to back off because she's got someone else to talk to.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. For me, like just thinking about how Verona's needed to grow into this idea of like what does she want to be? Yeah, what path does she want to pick? I kind of think that if she picked any of them, part of that journey would sort of almost have to be that it was a mistake, which is
Mm.
why I'm glad we haven't gone down that road. Because, like, I feel like the takeaway we sort of got from her thing in 13.1 was like the idea of the Carmine saying, sort of, no matter what path you pick in this system, you're still sort of losing to the system. So Verona committing to any implement, domain, familiar, or even specialty is almost in a way her losing
Mm.
that battle she's had.
I like that.
Familiar probably the most arguable,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, an implement, a domain, or even a specialty of the practice. I think
Mm.
if Verona had committed to one so early already, I'd have to see it turning out to be a mistake,
Mm.
and that would suck because that
That
shit
would
seems to be
suck.
pretty permanent.
Yeah. Yeah. Beard of Valor set us an interesting challenge, talking about how Wabo is great at creating new kind of interpretative senses, and Beard set us the challenge of coming up with some new senses of our own. So that was a fun one. I've always thought it would be fun to be able to sense like conflict within a person, e.g., if we're applying this to the otherverse setting, another who effectively has the ability to sense the things that somebody is obsessing about or struggling over in their mind, oh, what am I going to do about this situation? And they can kind of sense that and hence get information about the things that are the most weighing on somebody's mind. I guess it feels a bit Tattletale-esque to bring in Worm, but yeah, I thought that would be very fun and very freaky as a ability for somebody to have.
Yeah, and it does feel very otherversey because you're like your focus there essentially sort of places it on the thing that is the most prominent in their mind, and
Mm.
in a universe that's essentially powered by like unconscious and conscious thought. It makes sense that in a way that would be the easiest thing to see if you were some kind of mind reader.
Mm.
Right? Yeah, I like that. That does just feel like a power in the otherverse, like very easily. I love it.
Yeah. Did you have one that you came up with?
This reminded me of like a story I wanted to write like years and years ago that I hadn't thought about for years, but like I just had this idea for a thing where they were like twins or something, and they were psychically linked in this way that like they couldn't read each other's minds, but they could feel each other's bodies at all times.
Mm.
So like as I sort of wrote this down, I realized it's not that dissimilar to some aspects of the familiar relationship. But I guess I like always found it was interesting to explore this idea of like if you had the ability, I guess, to get all the sensations of someone else's body alongside your own, like what, and if they had that same thing back, like what that would do to the two of you and how you could live your lives.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
because so
Interesting.
it's not mind reading. It's like everything from the spinal cord down, like nervous system
It's
wise. I guess is
it's giving me Sense8 vibes.
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Interesting.
Like yeah, if I'd written it, there probably would have been less orgies, but like kind of the same general idea. Just yeah, without the psychic stuff. I guess the only psychic part was meant to be like yeah, physical sensations. I guess.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, cool. Fun question.
Yeah.
Uh Here's a question from Beleg Tal. What is your favorite book or story outside of the Wildberg canon, and how does Pale compare to the types of books or stories you normally enjoy? Do you want to answer this one first, Elliot?
Yeah, sure. I've got an answer that will probably not surprise many of you. I'd say these days my favorite story outside of Pale is The Expanse.
Mm.
I am very, very eagerly awaiting the ninth and final book in 3 months.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny. It's actually fairly similar to Pale in some ways.
Mm.
There's a group of similar themes relating to powers, structures, and dynamics. It's probably more focused on like the larger scale stuff.
Mm.
Like the Expanse sort of looks at how different groups of judges interact, like that sort of level, rather than like Pale is sort of really intentionally narrowed in on one part of the world.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, like in general, I guess to answer the second question in there of like how does Pale compare to the normal stuff you read or enjoy? I do read a lot of like urban fantasy and magic type stuff and watch, but um, often my tastes are usually a little bit less. How do I want to say this? Like intellectual. I do often find myself gravitating half the time to more popcorn level stuff.
Mm.
Does that make
Your
sense? Like
Matthew
I'll
Rileys.
Yeah, that's a great example. Or like the like the Marvel movies, like, you know,
Mm.
um
Whoa, back up there, pal.
I guess it's hard because it almost feels like since we started, like Deep Impact finished like a month and a half before Pale started, so we really only had that 1 month and a half between. I think like since we started Deep Impact, Pact and Pale have really always sort of fulfilled my like serious, hard thinking literature stuff because we spend so much time on these podcasts every week. By the time I get to other media, I'm like, I just want like entertainment, not
Mm,
challenging stuff. And
yeah.
I don't know if that's actually a healthy instinct, but like over the last 3 years, I really haven't engaged with much else that's really as thought provoking or intellectual
Mm.
because
Or
I've been so dedicated to like these stories.
or haven't engaged with it on that level. You know what I mean? Let yourself
Yeah,
engage with things on narrower levels because it is mental effort to to engage with stories and make yourself force yourself to stop and think about themes and all that jazz.
yeah. I'm just thinking like in the last year, I've had stuff like the Watchmen TV show and stuff sitting on my to watch list, but often like, you know, if I sort of do a Pale live read after like dinner or something, and then sit
Mm,
down to watch something after the Pale live read, it's like my brain's already a bit dead, and I don't want to watch something that I'm going to want to give time thinking about. So I'll just
you
put
feel
on
like you're
like,
doing it a disservice.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't feel like I'm in the space to do it, so I'll put on like Bob's Burgers or something. You know, like when you
Mm,
just sort of are entertained by it.
yeah,
Like yeah, like after this story's over, I'll probably make a conscious effort to start engaging with other more serious stuff more.
yeah, yeah. Speaking of serious stuff, my answer to this question, one of my favorite books, Princess Bride, fucking great book, love it, absolutely
Yeah.
a wonderful book. I know I forced you to read it, Elliot, and if I could force everyone to read it, I would because it's great. Uh, I think comparing it, like the types of stories that I normally enjoy, I feel like I usually read a lot more books that are like explicitly and actively comedic. Like Pale obviously has hilarious moments, of course, but it's not
Yeah.
like
You wouldn't call it a
it's not
comedy.
a comedy exactly,
Yeah.
right? Something like The Princess Bride, which is 100% a comedy, or like
Yeah.
Terry Pratchett books or something, right? That's what I
Yeah.
would normally read and enjoy reading. A lot more actively comedic stuff. Again, I think a similar thing to what you said. Like, I don't. They're very enjoyable on a level where you don't necessarily have to worry too much about diving into the themes and all that jazz. You can just enjoy them on the level that they want you to enjoy them.
Yeah, and I guess I just don't have the brain fitness to engage with everything I watch on a deep enough level, which maybe I
Mm,
should try and fix that. But yeah,
mm,
no, I agree. Like with exceptions of things like The Expanse, I don't think I've really engaged with much since we started these podcasts in the same way.
mm. Yeah. Next question from Grundux91. So much of the trio's experience as practitioners in Pale has been defined by the Carmine mystery. How has that defined them, and how do you think they'll define themselves once the mystery is solved?
Interesting.
Mm. Yeah, hmm. I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of thinking about once the mystery is gone, what will the trio be like? And I feel like we're seeing these characters grow in relation to the challenges that they're facing through the mystery, right? Like Verona's
Yeah,
figuring out what she wants from relationships, Avery's figuring out how to be happy with herself, etc. Like these are all coming from not necessarily just the mystery, but kind of prompted by the challenging situations they're being put in as a result of it. And so, I don't know, like, I feel like we're getting to the point where these characters are hitting their final forms. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily think they'll fundamentally change when the mystery is solved because they're going through their growth moments.
yeah. I mean, this is where you enter that weird territory of like saying, "Oh, has all this like really terrible stuff that's happened to them been good?" Um,
I mean,
You
there's
know, like
always a silver
that.
lining, right?
Yeah. I just, yeah, you know, there's like that super problematic thing a lot of stories do where it's like this trauma you went through made you better. You know, and like sometimes there's a subtle implication in the way they deliver that of like sort of saying that means the trauma was good.
Yeah.
Um I'm like, I wouldn't say that, but like, I think the journey the Kenneteers have gone on have almost been the ones they would have hopefully gone on without the mystery. It's just been like accelerated extra pressure versions because of the mystery. But like if they were just awoken by the Kennet others, at a random time, and there was no conflict, I
Mm,
imagine a lot of the same personal journeys would have still gone on.
mm,
It just might have taken longer with less pressure applied.
yeah, definitely.
And like there was actually a conversation very similar to this in the Game Club channel on our Discord. Shout out to the Game Club. So we're playing a game called Control at the moment, and I was basically complaining that it's a really interesting mystery story. Um, but there's nothing at the stage I'm at in the game, which admittedly is like the first half. I know really nothing about the character that doesn't relate directly to the mystery. Um, so in a way, my engagement with the game at the moment is entirely based on how invested I am with the mystery specifically.
Mm,
And Pale immediately jumps to my mind then as something that is more than that because like I would still happily read about these characters even without the mystery. Like the mystery is just a vehicle for the narrative.
mm,
Um but there's so much more to this story beyond that. And like so like I guess that's informing my answer of like thinking, oh, they'd probably just still be the same. They might just get there in a different, slower way. It's
mm.
because these characters stand on their own. The mystery is just a vehicle for the story.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um, Next up, I'm easily impressed has a bunch of questions for us. Let's start with this one. What's your favorite season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and why? I think season 4 was the best. Now, I have to say season 3. I think all the stuff about, like, that was the season that had Simmons go and have that, long time on the alien
Yeah.
planet. That had, I mean, okay, wait, hold on. Spoilers. But yeah, that had May's ex-husband turning into a monster serial killer. Like there was a bunch of wild stuff in that season that I really loved. The only thing that was bad about that season was it was pre-Deke, and Deke is the best character. But other than that, it was, I think, the highlight for me. I do love all of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. though. But yeah, season
To be
3,
fair,
primo.
I think that applies to all of these because season 4 was also pre-Deke. I believe Deke is season 5.
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah, season 4. I do just want to shout out. I'm easily impressed. Season 4 is a very good answer.
Yes.
Because that is the season that did the pods.
Yeah.
Something I'm still angry at the rest of network TV for not stealing.
Yeah, season 4 also had what was maybe my favorite moment of the entire show, which is that episode. I think it was, yeah, like the LMD episode where, um, like, I think Fitz is an LMD or Simmons, and there's like this wonderful scene where they go into the lab together, and you get the reveal, and it's just like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Yeah,
It was just like such a good mystery, juicy, very very juicy.
yeah. And my favorite thing about that season is so when they divided the season up into 3 pods. So this is that thing for those who don't know, where like the season was split up, and basically it was like 3 mini stories. So you know how like
Yeah,
some other shows will drag out a plot line for 22 episodes and just have like filler in the middle. What Agents of Shield decided to do was just do like 3 seasons of story on like
well,
7 episodes each.
the thing that I thought was
Um,
really radical about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is they decided to take all of the filler episodes that they would do over the entire series and
put
just
into
shove
season
them
1.
into season 1. Yeah. Shove them into the first half of season 1. And then from then on, the pacing was fucking breakneck. It was awesome.
Yeah. But like, yeah, ironically, season 1 of Agents of Shield is like one of the best examples of why pods are better. Um, but the cool thing about the pods as well, though, is like the reason it was all still season 4 and not just 3 seasons of shorter episodes is because towards the end, the major things involved in each pod all came together for like a super epic finale. So it was like rather than sort of dragging out one plot line and villain for a whole season, you do like 3 villains in the season and then sort of have the themes and stuff associated with them all come together for the finale. Like it was great. But that said, my answer is actually season 2, not season
Mm,
4. I think season 4 would get my second place. Uh, but the ending of season 2 for me is where my hype for the show like peaked. Like I think I loved the rest of the show, but for me, the other 5 seasons, I was just chasing the dragon after the season 2 finale. The way it ties together all of
the mid-season finale of season 2 as well, very, very good.
But I think this was the season that really dove into Sky's character and her family past.
Yeah.
And I think that was the thing they'd really pitched or put the show together based around. And I think it was the best storyline in the whole show. And then it was sort of after that, it always felt like they were doing follow-up stuff to me.
Yeah. I can feel that.
Yeah, that was like, you can tell when they pitched her character at the start of the show, they're like, this is where we want to take her. And then they did it in season 2. And then after then, they were just doing follow-up. And she was effectively the main character in the show. They sometimes acted like Coulson was the main character, but it was always Sky.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Other questions from I'm Easily Impressed. I'm Easily Impressed threw us a bunch of questions. I want to dive into this one, which I really like. Fuck, marry, kill for Alexander, Bristow, and Mussa.
Not gonna lie, I was actually a little mad when I saw this one. I had a plan to sort of do a question like this in one of the APU 2 segments.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, but I've already seen your answer now, so I'll have to think of a different one.
Yeah, so my answer was fuck Alex, I think, murder Bristow, and then Mussa's just the third one, so I guess he'll have to marry him.
Yeah. No,
marry him, inherit his others, set them free, I guess.
Yeah, like that's that has to be the only answer because like Bristow has nothing.
Oh yeah, Bristow is absolutely the murder. And then I guess you're just picking if you want to fuck Alex or Mussa. And you'd want to fuck like, Alex, right?
Yeah. Oh no, exactly. Like Alex is the hot one, but he'd be terrible to be in a relationship.
Oh yeah,
like, you 100%. Don't. I mean, Mussa's probably not great to be in a relationship.
At least Mussa has a lot of experience being in marriage-esque relationships. he's essentially
you could just blend into the others.
A bigamist,
a polygamist. Yeah,
polygamist.
Yeah, no, you like that's exactly. You can just blend into the crowd of others. It's great. Yeah, no, Moss is kind of a win-win because you either just like marry him and like do well in the system, and then you just do good change. Like you said, try and freeze others or like use his power for good. You know? Yeah, I agree. I guess arguably Mussa's the worst, so maybe you could go for like murder Mussa, but then you have to marry Alexander or Bristow.
I think Bristow is the one I would get the most joy from murdering.
See, I don't know if I agree. I think Mussa is worse, and he's more confident, well established, which would make it even more satisfying to knock him off his perch. Like, you know, Bristow was a bit of a grimy little like, you know, piece of shit, but I'd almost rather take down the big strong evil person. But the problem with killing Mussa is then I have to marry Bristow or Alexander, and I don't.
Yeah, like I mean, you could marry Bristow and then just like go live at his apartment block and hang out with like Clem and stuff. I don't know. I guess that's not the worst option. All right, should we move on to some more questions?
Yeah, I guess I should pick one of these now. I'm Easily Impressed did sort of ask, how has it been different following along with a web serial as it releases as opposed to like a finished one like Pact?
I don't know if I have a strong answer for this one. Like, I feel like theoretically we might be able to do things like plan in advance a bit more, but other than that, I don't know.
I do sort of miss that easy ability we had to. Like there are a number of times one of us would go on holiday, so we just record twice as many episodes.
That's true.
The week beforehand.
That was nice to be able to do that.
Whereas like now, going away involves either doing like those solo episodes that we did, or like catching up afterwards, which I don't like either of those options as much. One of the big differences is it was nicer to just be able to record a few episodes ahead. And like I know Malia and Jenny record the core part of their episodes like with a bit of a buffer.
Don't give away their secrets. Shame on you.
They've talked about it in the episodes.
Oh, okay, then it's fine.
But yeah, I'm jealous of their ability to do stuff like that.
Yeah, it was nice being able to do that. Although the fact that we can now be more involved in conversations around the work as it's developing, I think, like, that's much more fun. Like, we would do comment dives when we were doing Deep Impact, and that was fun to get a picture of like what people were thinking at the time. But now being able to discuss like theories as they're emerging, all that stuff, I fucking live for reading other people's fan theories. So
Yeah, I've had this weird thing, and like it's not worth going into the all the whys or whatever, but like weirdly, I've felt more disconnected from the community in Pale than I have in Pact. Like that was actually something I think I had a better experience with in Pact than I have in Pale. The way I've been engaging with Pale and the podcast has sort of kept me away from the community to some degree. Um,
interesting.
and I almost miss with Pact. I was just able to read old comments or engage with everyone who was like
Reading
listening.
along, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But that's probably just a big chunk of that is a problem with me and how I've like handled myself in the last year and with this podcast or whatever. But like,
Mm.
yeah, that's actually it's weirdly been. I felt more isolated in Pale than I have in Pact, which is like weird.
Interesting. Okay. Shall we get some other questions in here?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, actually, I'm going to go to this one next. So Landis963 asked a question, basically just to me, which is nice, saying that they are planning to run a tabletop RPG with the Otherverse magic system. Can I comment on whether I use the Pact Dice character generation system or the Fate character generation system for the players of Pace? And the answer to that is I did the fucking nerdy thing and wrote my own character generation system that takes parts of both of those two, which I liked. So that I wrote a character creation sheet for the players so they would know what the character creation process looked like. And that sheet is available to you if you want to take a look and see what I did. You can find it stickied in the Pace channel in our Discord. So doofmedia.com/Discord and head into the Discord, head into the Pace channel in the old podcast section, and there's a sticky there with all the documents and stuff from the show.
Yeah, I'll make sure to stick that link into the Discord into our show notes again. But yeah, essentially the Pace channel in there has all the resources Ruben shared with us, so that's the place to go.
Megafire had some questions. 2 questions. First question, which non-Kennet other would you like to see recruited into Kennet? Now, I was talking before about how Nina is like one of my favorite conceptually others. I mean, she's not like a powerful other, but just like I think it would be great to have her around more because a librarian animus is just a very fun idea. If we're talking about like who would I like to see, who would I think would be interesting in the story, I think Drown is probably one that could theoretically happen and would be quite interesting to see integrated. So that's my legit answer, I guess.
I think we talked about that idea like in that chapter where like Drown should just come to Kennet. But he's got his girl he needs to go save if she's still alive. I have an answer that immediately jumped to my mind from Pact, so obviously I can't say it, but I'm sure most of you listening who have read Pact will probably know who I'm talking about. Ruben is currently speculating.
I'm speculating in our notes. There are some really. I've just thought of one that I think would actually genuinely be really interesting.
That is not what I thought of, but that would seeing that character in Kennet would be interesting as hell.
Put it in the notes, the one you thought of, Elliot, so I can see who you mean. Is it? Okay, yeah. I thought that might be it. And that they're the same answer as Nina to me, of like a character that I just like and want to see more of. But one that I think would be really interesting is a certain one that I can't really hint at. Is there a way that I can hint at them, Elliot, in a non-spoilery way?
No, we'll just talk about it on the Discord, I'm sure.
Let's just say they get along really well with
I'm cutting that.
Okay, anyway.
That's so like that. That's not subtle at all. No.
Just like bleep it or something.
Yeah, we'll ask him to
bleep it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait. Let me get some clean bleep audio.
Beep. Oh, sorry. I thought I was providing the bleep audio.
Okay. Yeah. But no, like an actual answer from Pale. I mean, Drown was one of my first thoughts as well, but that feels like recency bias. I'm trying to, yeah, I'm trying to think of any others we've met throughout the story who aren't from Kennet. Like all obviously, I guess there's a blanket rule that kind of applies to most of the Mossa familiars, just because I want them out of that situation.
Ballerina. What about Ballerina? I think Ballerina would be fun.
I was gonna say like some of Verona's friends from the beach.
Oh yeah,
like the forest spirit, or like
yeah.
the little like rat thing she made the shrine for. Yeah.
Cool.
No, that the goblin from Toadswallow's interlude. Not his girlfriend, although also his girlfriend.
Bubble.
The one who accidentally kidnapped the girl and brought her to the
Yes. That goblin. Yes.
Yeah.
That does sound like a fun one. Also Milkmaid. Megafire 7 also
wait, no, hold on.
Megafire 7 also asked, which of the girls' journeys do you find the most compelling so far? To me, I have to say, I think Avery. I just think Avery has gone on such a journey, and it's just been such a delight watching Avery as a character. Lucy's still my favorite, but I do love the journey that Avery has been on.
Yeah, I'd probably have to agree with that. Like, I'd be like, Verona's my favorite, but in saying that, like, Avery's in many ways has been the journey that it sort of felt like it's been the easiest to keep up with and like see the milestones. And maybe I think she's probably the furthest along. We sort of talked about that earlier in this episode. So it could just be that, like, in a way, because she started to have her biggest realizations and like not just have the realization of what she needs to fix, but like she's made the most progress in like moving towards fixing it. It's sort of easier to point to hers because it's the most complete at the moment.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like in general, I actually think that tracking the girls' journeys is something I don't do very well. It's easy to lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And my memory's so bad that like what happens, I'll just miss when something is no longer applicable and we've moved on to the next part, and I'll like focus on like something that was true about a character way too long ago. Something I'm like always trying to not do is like get caught in my past impressions of them.
Yeah, it's hard to break, first impressions or past impressions that you have of a character, isn't it?
Yeah, like I can definitely think of times where I sort of have been halfway through writing or like something about how this ties into somebody's journey, and then realizing we've actually sort of moved to the next stage and I'm way behind. And yeah. So I don't know. I just don't think it's something I do great at.
Yeah. Finally, Lurking Beluga asked us a bunch of questions. Too many for us to answer all of them, so I picked out some of the ones that I really liked for us. So first, we mentioned that we were going to try different things for the format of Pale Reflections. Now we've done about 100 episodes since the beginning of Pale. Which of the variations that we've done do we think were the most effective or ineffective, and why? I think our answers on this might differ a bit, because you mentioned before you didn't like the solo episodes we did last Christmas, but I really thought they were very fun. Like a different vibe. 100%.
It's okay. I'm not taking that personally.
But like,
it's fine. You just have more fun without me.
They were very different, and I wouldn't want to do the show as just those. But I think just having a smaller, like, hey, here's just a bite-sized bit of what we thought, and I liked kind of more explicitly working in some fan theories and community thoughts over the chapters. I just found that very fun.
Yeah, no, I do agree that the variety was nice. Like if I could go back in time and give the start of Power Reflections Elliot some advice, it would be to try and make sure that you don't fall into like a rut or a routine. And like you keep trying to keep it fresh. Like something, I went back to some of our old scripts to pull some stuff out for All Packed Up. It's been almost a year since we did like a bonus bit. Like we used to do fun stuff like that. And I just, because of various things and workloads and stuff.
I did like doing monster corners. In fairness, we haven't met a lot of new monsters, which is and the fact that we call them monsters, I even feel a bit uncomfortable about now.
Yeah, there are certain reasons why some of the staples from like Deep Impact aren't as relevant.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think that in a way, we fell into a bit of like a routine for a lot of this show, and what like lost some of that energy that some of the earlier Power Reflections and a lot of Deep Impact had. And you're right that the solo episodes were different enough that they sort of allowed us to engage with that a bit again.
Mm.
Just because they, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not somebody who likes to do the same thing for years. I always like to be trying to change it and stuff. And
Mm.
I don't know that we've really done that with Power Reflections as much as I would like.
Mm.
Um, for me though, I think the thing that I'm the most happy with how it's turned out is like easily the reflecting episodes at the end of the arcs.
Those
like
are good.
just
Those
bringing
always
in,
feel like we get very different
yeah,
thoughts and perspectives on the story, and it's always fascinating.
yeah, exactly. Like I think, especially because I'm pretty sure that most of the guests we have on here are cleverer than us, or at least me.
Don't tell the audience our secret, Elliot.
Yeah, like I think at the very least, you can't argue with the fact that like they bring in fresh perspectives and
Yeah.
it like adds a new dimension to the discussion. Like, again, sometimes they're a bit overwhelming because we do them on top of our regular schedule.
And they're always
Like,
quite long episodes.
yeah, like last weekend we recorded like the 2 hours with Snowdrop's Tiny Fan, then the 2 hour regular episode, then the next day we had Game Club, and like by Sunday afternoon I just went and had a nap.
Yeah, I was
I was
asleep all
wrecked.
day on Sunday.
So like the implementation could probably use some work,
Yeah.
but like that said, there's still like the high, like that was why we did the Snowdrop's Tiny Fan episode first, was because it was
because
like,
we knew it was going to be a good one.
yeah,
And it was. It was a wonderful one. If you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it.
yeah, and so like, that's something like I definitely encourage, like, more shows of this sort of format to do. Even like even ones who aren't following a story live, but I think every now and then, like having a regular guest episode and just sort of changing it up, I think is like just really good. That's probably the one way we've avoided falling into that like routine that I was talking about before.
Yeah, we are more purely focusing on the things we really want to talk about for a section. I'd love to hear, just in general, what our audience thinks. Like, from a slightly selfish perspective, I think as we continue to do podcasts, it'll be interesting to hear what types of, mix em ups people enjoy the most. So please do let us know in the Discord or in the discussion thread what you like, what you didn't like, etc.
Like we are always in the back of our minds and occasionally in conversation with each other talking about what will happen whenever Power Reflections finishes. So it's definitely good to know what parts of Power Reflections people like, so we think about how we take that forward.
Yeah.
I'd also want to say, like, Lurking Beluga specifically called out Pale Predictor as something we sort of tried. And like I wouldn't call Pale Predictor a failure. It's obviously still quite active, and we get a lot of great stuff in there. But like,
yeah, I do really love the predictions that we get in there. They're always very fun to read through.
I do though sometimes feel guilty that I don't feel like I ever was able to give it the time or attention it deserved.
Yeah,
like,
we originally were going to like be adding categories to it constantly and stuff like that. It's just so much to do.
There's still like 3 categories in there, and I think the newest one's from like Arc 5. Basically everyone's just either stuck to whodunit or they've just we had miscellaneous in there, and we probably should have just left it at whodunit and miscellaneous.
I think who or what is miss is still a category in there.
Yeah.
Which maybe will come back.
I think that's the one category that got taken out, I think.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And it got replaced by one in like Arc 4 or something. But yeah, like I mean, I don't know if you remember, but when we first started talking about Pale Predictor, there was like all this brainstorming with some other people as well that involved thinking about like there's going to be like a whole thing where you could sort of get awarded points. So you could even submit predictions as simple as like whose chapter or whose perspective will the next chapter be from, and like getting that right would be worth 3 points or something. And then but that was like going to involve
it's like a whole fantasy football league type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was going to be way more in depth, and it was like it was going to not only involve probably programming a small website, but then you'd also need a moderator or voting system that people trusted to award points. Like if somebody predicted in Arc 2, what Miss was, then when it's revealed, half an arc later, who decides how many points that ends up being worth?
Mm.
Who decides what the odds are on a prediction? So it's going to be like a whole thing. And if we hadn't been doing the podcast, I might have had the workload to manage that whole thing, but it probably would have been fucking hard. But like if there was ever another mystery web serial that I was into, I'd consider reviving that idea rather than doing a podcast.
Yeah. I do think Pale Predictor, man, what a great name that is. I'm so glad that Class Ranker was part really early on in the story so we could land on the wonderful name of Pale Predictor. It's just so perfect.
Yeah, it was because I remember the way that happened is we decided we wanted to do this and we couldn't come up with a name, and I pitched like 8 at you, and none of them felt right, and then it was just the first one you suggested back was just Power Prediction. I was like,
Oh,
"Fuck,
did
you
I
got it
come
in
up with
one."
this name? Damn,
Yeah, you did.
I'm clever. That's good. I wasn't trying to just blow smoke up my own ass.
No.
I'd honestly forgotten.
No, I genuinely believe you'd forgotten that. But yeah, no, you it was like your first suggestion. And then I
Damn,
think you added
I'm
more
clever.
afterwards. And like all your other ones, I was like, no, I think you nailed it.
Yeah,
this time.
100%. Yeah, got it in one. Another question that we got from Lurking Beluga, and I think this will be our last question, which is just a fun one to wrap it up on. What question do you think you could ask that, as long as everyone answered, would have 100% chance of getting the culprit that to confess in a way they couldn't wriggle out of or claim an exception to? Now, this is a hard one, but I do. It's effectively like a brain teaser, right? And I really loved it. I thought of a few possible answers, but there are some that the Fae could just sneak out of. I think the one I like the most, which is maybe a bit of a cheat, is what are the top 10 true facts that I would think make you the most guilty of the murder or associated conspiracy of the Carmine Beast? So they have to say the things that I would think make them the most guilty, ranked in order of, most guilty-ish.
I love the idea of the top 10 as well as a way of
I turned it into a listicle so that I could put it on my Watch Mojo account later.
No, I really like that as a way to because so for instance, my answer was sort of like, who is the most responsible for the Carmine's death sort of thing. We can get to that one in a sec, but like the thing about that is, all you need to do is sideline it with one thing. I think the fun thing about this is like for Marissa to get around like a top 10 true facts, she has to come up with 10 other things.
Bullshit things.
That's a huge ask.
It's kind of cheating, but I thought it was good.
No, I really like the top 10 true facts as a way to like force the truth out of them, even if it's only 4 or 5 down. Yeah. Because it's funny going back and like looking at like Arc 2 and stuff. Because I think, as I've mentioned, my sister is around Arc 3 at the moment. And I like talking to her about the questions they're asking in Arc 2. It's so funny how all of them are like, like, were you involved in the murder? Because we were assuming that somebody had to be directly involved.
Yeah.
And that was what let everyone squirrel out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, really. We thought that the Kennedys were doing well at the time, but they really didn't ask any Munchkin-y kind of questions, right? Like, here's another possible one that I thought of, which is, what question would you ask yourself to get the most incriminating but honest possible answer? And then what is that answer that you would give? This is like, how can I trick the genie into giving me more than 3 wishes types of things.
No, you know what that's starting to remind me of? You know that thing where it's like one of these demons lies,
and
the other one always tells 100%. The truth. And it's it starts to feel like those sorts of questions. I see. My idea was to ask who in the town is the most responsible for the Carmine's death. With the idea being that hopefully most responsible was enough of a qualifier that at least the culprits would all sort of have to incriminate each other.
Yeah, but I could really see Marissa saying something like, the system that is perpetuated by practitioners or some dumb shit like that to sneak out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's such a murderer fucking thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, but the problem is Mariska did basically say those kinds of things, and we didn't necessarily think she was the murderer.
Yeah, true.
So, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, We have one more question here, Elliot, but it's not a question for us. No, no, no. This question is for you. That's right, you, the listener. It's our new discussion question. The question that we thought would be a fun one is, what enticements would it take for you to take a role as a judge? And which of the judges would you be? I think we've been seeing a lot about the judges, obviously, especially Carmine in the past few chapters, as well as the enticements that it would take for John to take this role. But I think it's interesting to ask, would you want to be a judge? Which judge? And what could they do to kind of sweeten the pot?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in the answers to both of these questions. Like, I think it's very fun to think, because it's not only learning what people think of the job, but also which job they want. Like,
Yeah.
I'm very interested to hear people's answers to this, because I don't know that I have my own yet.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. If you do have an answer to this discussion question, you can put it in our discussion thread, which will be linked in the show notes down below.
Yes, you can also find us on Twitter. That's where the live reads are, as well as announcements about, whatever else we're doing or whatever else is going on. In fact, just looking at how long this recording's going for, I'm going to put it out there. This episode might be coming out 12 hours late.
Yeah, it's certainly our longest episode that is not a reflecting episode, right?
Yeah. But so I'm going to be posting about that on Twitter, probably as I fail to edit it tonight. In which case, if it is 12 hours late, you would have known that if you were following us on Twitter.
Don't get mad at us, because we told you. Check the Twitter. If you want to check out more from the Duff Media Network, you can go to duffmedia.com. Like, for example, you can find the link to the Duff Discord, which is where you can argue about which packed others would make the top 5 best Kennet others. I'll be putting my answer in there right after the show. So go to duffmedia.com to find out more.
Sorry, this is just for everybody who's listening to this when it came out. $5 says Ruben's just gonna contextlessly, like without any context, just write the name of another from Pact in spoiler bars.
Not one,
in the channel.
5. I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 okay. Without the context.
That's fine. So all of you listening to this now, like a day later, and it's finally making sense why Ruben just did this for no reason.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Nah, it's fine.
But yeah, no, the Doof Media website's where you can find out about all the other shows on the network as well. If you're not listening to Pale in comparison, then is it rude to call our listeners idiots?
I mean, probably, yeah.
Yeah, you really should be. It's like, I'm enjoying the heck out of it, especially like if you've been like if you've read Pact, and seeing someone go through that for the first time through the lens of Pale is just so fascinating. And if you haven't read Pact, you should be doing it alongside Malia. Yeah, it's like listening to that podcast each week has quickly become a highlight of like my podcast listening.
Yeah, there are a few people that we know that are going along with it, and I think that's so fascinating. I love hearing the perspectives of people going through Pact for the first time.
How great was it talking to Snowdrop's?
I know, it was so wonderful. Yeah. Anyway, if you want to support our show and Pale in Comparison and all the other great shows on the Duff Media Network, go to patreon.com/duffmedia and support us.
And don't forget to stop by Warbo's Patreon, patreon.com/Warbo. You've probably listened to what I can only assume is about a 3-hour episode of us talking about his story. So, like, really, you should probably be...
In fairness, about 20 minutes that was Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. chat.
I don't know about 20 minutes.
I looked at the time earlier. I'm pretty sure it was about 20 minutes.
Oh, boy. Really?
Or maybe it was about 15, but it was a solid amount of time.
You would have thought we'd got that out of our system where we did like a whole takeover of the Doofcast episode.
Nah. I will talk about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. till the day I die.
Okay, cool. Well, I think with that, we're finally done.
New discussion question. Which character from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. would make the best practitioner? Answers in the discussion thread. Have a good night, everyone.